In the land where the Tigris and Euphrates once carved life into the desert, something ancient stirs beneath the dust. Here in the cradle of civilization, what we now call Mesopotamia, lie fragments of knowledge so advanced they defy everything we thought we knew about the ancient world. Clay tablets etched with celestial calculations more accurate than some modern instruments. Strange architectural alignments that mirror constellations we believed they couldn't see. And myths that read like encrypted blueprints. How did a civilization more than 5,000 years old track the paths of planets with near-perfect precision? What force moved millions of bricks into ziggurats that still baffle engineers today? And why do so many symbols found in Mesopotamian ruins echo in distant cultures thousands of miles away, from ancient Egypt to the mountains of Palestine? These aren't just historical puzzles, they are whispers from a forgotten world, one that may have understood more than we do now. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into the science of ancient Mesopotamia, what it got right, what it left behind, and what no one can explain. In a dimly lit corner of the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, a cracked slab of black stone rests in silence. On its surface, faded cuneiform characters spiral down in neat, disciplined lines, etched by hands long turned to dust. This is the Weld Blundell prism, a relic from over 4,000 years ago. Its inscription, known to scholars as the Sumerian king list, is both a record and a riddle. The list appears at first glance to be a simple chronicle. Kings, their cities, and the lengths of their reigns. A historical ledger carved in clay. But the deeper one reads, the stranger it becomes. It begins not with a founding monarch or a tale of conquest, but with something far more enigmatic. After the kingship descended from heaven, Eridu became the seat of kingship. These are not metaphorical phrases. In the worldview of the Sumerians, kingship, Malamu, was not a political construct. It was a divine order handed down from above, and what follows is even more confounding. The earliest kings listed are said to have reigned for periods of time that strain the limits of belief. Alulim of Eridu, the first king, 28,800 years. Alalgar, 36,000 years. Enmenluana of Bad Tabira, 43,200 years. The list goes on. 8 kings, ruling for nearly 250,000 years, before a great flood swept over the land. A flood, a pattern. Scholars have long noted the parallels between this Sumerian deluge and the flood narratives of other ancient cultures, Babylonian, Assyrian, even biblical. Could these kings, then, be mythological? Symbols of a lost golden age, distorted over generations? That is the prevailing theory. The early reigns are often dismissed as legendary, an expression of a culture trying to reckon with its origins. The numbers, some argue, may represent lunar or seasonal cycles, misunderstood by modern readers. Others suggest a numerological code, one that masks political or religious messaging behind symbolic figures. But the mystery refuses to settle, because after the flood, the list becomes more familiar. The reign lengths become shorter, the kings more plausible. Cities like Uruk, Ur, and Akkad emerge from the clay tablets and into the annals of archaeology. Gilgamesh appears, not just as the epic hero, but as a listed king of Uruk, with a reign of 126 years. A figure who may have walked the earth, only to be woven into legend. Here, fact and myth begin to blur, and the prism remains curiously consistent. Even with fantastical reigns and divine claims, the list is structured with precision. Kings rise, cities fall, capitals shift, like a baton passed from one sacred place to another. The document follows a logic that suggests it was more than just mythology. It was a framework, An attempt to legitimize power, yes, but perhaps also to encode something deeper. A memory? A truth veiled in metaphor? Which raises a question that lingers in the minds of researchers and fringe theorists alike. What if the early kings were not entirely fictional? Alternative thinkers have proposed that the ancient Sumerians inherited knowledge from a now-lost civilization, one that existed before recorded history, perhaps even before the end of the last ice age. Some point to the anomalously advanced astronomical understanding found in Mesopotamian records. Others draw connections to megalithic structures thousands of miles away, from Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey to ruins in the mountains of Palestine, sites that predate the earliest cities, yet show signs of sophisticated planning and ritual purpose. Could the Sumerian king list be an echo of that forgotten world? A timeline inherited rather than invented? Even within the academic community, the list continues to provoke. Why did the Sumerians begin their record with the notion of kingship descending from heaven? Was it poetic expression, religious dogma, or a literal belief? The Sumerians did not leave behind speculative fiction. Their writing was for administration, ceremony, and history. Their records, painstakingly pressed into wet clay, were meant to endure. They chronicled taxes, land ownership, transactions, births, deaths, offerings to the gods. So why would this record, the king list, veer so far from realism unless it preserved a narrative that, to them, was truth? And then there's the flood, the moment that divides the list in two. Before it, impossibly long reigns, otherworldly kings. After it, rulers of flesh and blood. The prism doesn't attempt to reconcile the two. It simply draws the line and continues, as if there was a before. And something happened. Could this flood be more than myth? Geological evidence suggests that around 10,000 BC, sea levels rose dramatically as glaciers melted at the end of the last ice age. In some parts of Mesopotamia, layers of silt interrupt archaeological strata, evidence of sudden, catastrophic inundations. Could such an event have wiped clean a forgotten past, leaving only fragments, myths clutched by survivors? Of course, none of this can be proven, and that is what keeps the king list suspended in this strange gray space between history and speculation. A single prism, less than a foot tall, cracked, weathered, incomplete. Yet it carries within it an origin story that challenges our timeline, our understanding of kingship, and the very nature of history. Was it the product of imagination, religious conviction? Or is it a clue, one of the few that survived from a time before time? We may never know, but in the stillness of the museum, beneath the soft glass that protects the prism from air and light, the characters remain, silent, watching, waiting, perhaps, for someone to read them, not as myth, but as memory. Beneath the golden light of the southern Iraqi desert, ancient cities lie in fragments. Names like Ur, Nippur, and Lagash emerge from the earth in baked clay and broken stone. Their temples and ziggurats speak of a world once rich with ceremony, politics, and gods. But of all the cities that defined early Mesopotamian civilization, one remains conspicuously absent. A city that should have stood above them all. Akkad, the capital of the world's first true empire. The seat of a power that once stretched from the Persian Gulf to the mountains of Anatolia. Ruled by Sargon the Great, a man whose name still echoes in the cuneiform records of his enemies and successors alike. And yet, no one knows where it is. No ruins, no definitive coordinates, no stone bearing its name that archaeologists can point to and say, "Here stood Akkad." How could the heart of the Akkadian Empire, perhaps the most consequential city of the 3rd millennium BC, simply vanish? The historical record offers clues, but they are cryptic, fragmented, and frustratingly vague. Ancient texts describe Akkad as lying near Kish on the banks of the Euphrates, or between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, general directions in a region where river courses have shifted dramatically over the millennia. Some clay tablets place it in proximity to Babylon, or suggest it stood not far from Akkad, its presumed twin. But despite decades of intensive fieldwork, satellite imaging, and excavation, no site has been definitively identified. The mystery begins with Sargon of Akkad, a man who, according to later legends, was born a humble cupbearer, placed in a basket upon a river, and raised among strangers. He would go on to conquer Sumer, unify warring city-states, and establish a new order. His rule marked the beginning of what historians now call the Akkadian Empire, around 2334 BC. Sargon built his capital at Akkad, a city reportedly founded by his own hand and blessed by the goddess Ishtar. It became the administrative and symbolic heart of an empire, producing a distinctive style of royal art, literature, and law. Akkad was said to be filled with wealth, with foreign tribute flowing in from across the Near East. But then, just a few generations later, the empire fell. Famine, rebellion, invasion by Gudean tribes from the Zagros Mountains. The Sumerian king list records this decline as sudden and calamitous. The once mighty Akkadian realm crumbled, and its capital seems to have faded with it. Some researchers believe Akkad was buried beneath centuries of river silt, perhaps even under modern urban sprawl. Others argue that the shifting Euphrates may have consumed it entirely, washing away its bricks and leaving no trace. The very forces that nourished Mesopotamian civilization, flood, sediment, time, may also be what erased its most important city from the map. But what if there's more to the story? As with so many ancient mysteries, absence invites speculation. Could Akkad have been more than just a city of clay and stone? Some fringe researchers propose that it may have had a symbolic or esoteric dimension, designed and placed according to celestial principles. Akkadian records suggest a deep connection between their rulers and the stars. Could its location have been chosen for reasons now lost to time? Reasons that might lie beyond mere practicality or defense? Others go further still, wondering whether Akkad was deliberately hidden. Not in a conspiratorial sense, but as a result of cultural trauma. When Sargon's empire fell, it was followed by a period of upheaval, with later Sumerian texts describing the Akkadian kings as having angered the gods. Was Akkad deliberately forgotten? Cursed? Erased not by nature, but by intention? There's also the question of Agade, the name by which Akkad is sometimes referenced. Some scholars consider Agade and Akkad to be the same city, while others believe they were distinct, perhaps twin centers of administration or religion. Could the confusion over names have led archaeologists astray for generations? Then there are the tantalizing references in distant cultures. Some ancient Egyptian texts describe contact with a powerful land to the northeast. Later Hittite records speak of a formidable empire that once ruled from the sea to the mountains. Could echoes of Akkad be found not just in Mesopotamian lore, but in the margins of other civilizations' memories? Satellite imagery in recent years has revealed patterns beneath the soil, ancient canal lines, long-lost roads, and settlement mounds. Several candidates for Akkad's location have emerged. Tel al-Fakariya, near the Kabur River, Tel Brak, further north, or an area near modern-day Baghdad, where buried structures lie under layers of development. Each possibility stirs hope and debate. And yet, none have delivered the definitive evidence. No royal seal, no foundation inscription, no unmistakable mention of Akkad in its native tongue. Why does this matter? Because Akkad is more than just a missing city. It is the first known expression of empire. the prototype for centralized power, imperial governance, and statecraft. Its loss is not just geographical, it's a silence in the historical record, a void where we should find answers about how empires begin and how they end. In a region where countless ancient cities have been found, Uruk, Nippur, even Ebla and Mari, why does Akkad alone remain a ghost? Could it still be waiting beneath the sands, overlooked? Or was it something entirely different, never meant to be found in the way we expect? For now, Akkad remains both real and elusive, a name etched in clay, a legend preserved in the annals of kings, and yet a place without a trace. And so the question endures. Where is Akkad? And what will it mean when, if we find it? In the heart of ancient Mesopotamia, where the waters of the Euphrates once flowed broad and slow, the city of Babylon rose from the plains like a dream cast in brick. Its walls were said to stretch for miles, tall enough to rival the clouds, thick enough to host chariot races. And within these storied walls, so the ancient writers claimed, grew one of the greatest marvels of the ancient world, the Hanging Gardens. Terraces stacked upon terraces, lush with greenery, vines cascading over columns, exotic flowers blooming in the desert heat, a mountain of life suspended above stone, defying gravity and flourishing in a place where no such garden should have grown. At least, that's what we've been told. Greek historians like Strabo and Philo of Byzantium described the gardens in vivid detail. They wrote of vaulted terraces made of baked brick, of irrigation systems that raised water from the depths of the Euphrates to nourish orchards high above the city. A green sanctuary said to have been built by a king, perhaps Nebuchadnezzar II, for his homesick wife, longing for the mountainous landscapes of her homeland. It is a story of love, of engineering brilliance, of artistic vision. And yet, there's a problem. No definitive evidence has ever been found. Babylon has been excavated, its gates unearthed, its temples and ziggurats mapped and studied. But no archaeological trace of the Hanging Gardens has ever been discovered, not a foundation, not a fragment of the vast irrigation system said to power it. Not a single written record from Babylon itself mentions the gardens at all. How could a wonder of the world, something so grand it captivated the ancient imagination, leave no trace behind? One explanation, offered by many historians, is simple. Perhaps the gardens never existed at Babylon at all. Perhaps they were confused with something else. Perhaps they were somewhere else entirely. Recent scholarship has turned its eyes northward, to Nineveh, in the Assyrian heartland. Some researchers now believe the Hanging Gardens may have been misattributed by later Greek and Roman writers, who confused Babylon with the imperial grandeur of Assyria. In the ruins of Nineveh, once capital of the Assyrian Empire, inscriptions from the reign of King Sennacherib describe an engineering marvel unlike anything seen before. He speaks of a wonder for all people, a lush complex filled with fruit trees, shade, and flowing water. What's more, Sennacherib boasts of using an advanced water-lifting device to supply his gardens, a technology some scholars believe might have functioned like an early version of the Archimedes screw, centuries before its time. Could the myth of the Hanging Gardens have originated here, not in Babylon, but in the palaces of Nineveh? Could ancient authors, writing centuries later, far from Mesopotamia, have simply confused the two cities? It is a compelling theory, but even here, doubts remain. The very idea of gardens suspended above stone platforms, fed by water lifted dozens of feet against gravity, remains an astonishing concept for the ancient world. Could such a system have existed with the materials and knowledge of the time? Could Mesopotamian engineers, brilliant though they were, truly have created something so complex that it rivaled the hydraulic technologies of modern history? Clay tablets from the region describe aqueducts, canals, and reservoirs. We know the ancients mastered the movement of water in ingenious ways. Babylon itself was threaded with channels. But lifting water, consistently and in volume, high into the air to support a living mountain of vegetation? That's something else entirely. And what about the emotional truth of the story? The idea that Nebuchadnezzar might have built the gardens for his wife, a queen from a distant mountainous region, yearning for the green hills of her childhood. No Babylonian record confirms this, but myths often grow from seeds of truth. Was there a royal woman whose longing inspired something remarkable? Was the story passed down orally, transformed over generations into the legend we know today? Even more speculative theories suggest the gardens may have been symbolic rather than physical. Some fringe researchers wonder if the hanging referred not to physical suspension, but to a metaphorical or spiritual state. A place of ritual ascent, an artificial mountain echoing the cosmic axis or ziggurat form where priest-kings communed with the divine. Could the gardens have been part of a sacred space, perhaps deliberately hidden from public view? And what if the gardens did exist, just as the legends describe, but have simply been lost to time? The landscape of Mesopotamia has shifted dramatically over the past 2,500 years. Rivers have changed course. Floods have buried cities. Entire layers of civilization lie crushed beneath sediment and modern development. In the 20th century, the waters of the Euphrates were diverted for irrigation and dam construction. Vast stretches of the ancient world now lie submerged or destroyed. Could the Hanging Gardens have been built not in the city proper, but beyond its core, along the river, in a royal park or palace complex now obliterated by time and human intervention? Or, more provocatively, could it be that we have yet to look in the right place? There are references, scattered in classical texts, to a Babylon more vast and varied than what has been uncovered. A city with multiple districts, satellite towns, sprawling estates. The idea that we have already discovered all of Babylon may be premature. So we are left with a puzzle. A marvel described in meticulous, poetic detail. A feat of architecture and horticulture said to rival the heavens. And yet, no proof, no stones, no roots, only stories, retold across continents and centuries. Did the Hanging Gardens ever exist? If so, where? And what might they have looked like, rising out of the desert like a green miracle? Or is the true wonder not the gardens themselves, but the enduring power of a story that refuses to die? It is not large, not ornate, no gold, no gems, no dazzling craftsmanship, just clay, weathered, marked by the impressions of a stylus, hardened by time. But within its simple form, the ancients believed, lay the structure of fate itself. They called it the Tablet of Destinies. In Mesopotamian mythology, this tablet was no mere administrative record or religious text. It was the very key to cosmic authority, a divine object said to grant its bearer control over the heavens, the earth, and all that dwelled within. Kings did not rule by sword or crown alone, but by the decree held within this sacred tablet. Gods themselves vied for its possession. In the epics of old, whoever held the Tablet of Destinies held the universe. But what exactly was it? Was it myth? Symbol? Or could it have been something real? Something lost? The story first appears in the ancient myth cycles of Sumer and Akkad. In the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, the Tablet of Destinies plays a pivotal role. When the chaos goddess Tiamat rises against the younger gods, she grants the tablet to Kingu, her chosen champion. With it, Kingu becomes the commander of her forces. empowered to decide destinies, to issue decrees that even the gods cannot reverse. Later, the god Marduk defeats Tiamat and claims the tablet for himself, solidifying his place as king of the gods. In other versions, the tablet is stolen, lost, or hidden, always pursued, always protected. The narrative suggests that it is not just powerful, but dangerous, its possession altering the balance of divine order. So what was it? To the modern reader, the Tablet of Destinies might seem metaphorical, a mythological construct representing divine law or cosmic control. But the language used in the myths is surprisingly literal. The tablet is described as a physical object, carried, stolen, worn around the neck. It bears inscriptions. It can be read. It can be lost. Some cuneiform tablets, uncovered from Mesopotamian sites, even appear to reference it indirectly, not as myth, but as something once seen or remembered. One hymn to the god Ninurta, for example, lists the Tablet of Destinies among the divine instruments of power. It is named alongside weapons, seals, and measuring tools, things both sacred and functional. Could it be that the Tablet of Destinies was once a real object? Perhaps a ceremonial artifact used in coronations or rituals? A clay tablet engraved with royal decrees, laws, astronomical charts, a proto-legal code, or cosmic calendar designed to impose structure on chaos? Or was it something more? Among some researchers, there's quiet speculation that the myths of the Tablet of Destinies might point to something far older, something inherited from a civilization even more ancient than Sumer itself. If Mesopotamian society was not the beginning, but a continuation, could this tablet have preserved a fragment of lost knowledge? Something passed down, misunderstood, revered? Fringe theorists have offered even bolder ideas. Some suggest the tablet may have encoded advanced astronomical data, cycles of planets, eclipses, lunar phases. After all, the Mesopotamians tracked celestial events with remarkable precision, using systems still studied today. Could the destinies inscribed on the tablet have referred not to human fate, but to the movements of the stars, seen by ancient peoples as omens and divine mandates? Others go further, speculating on ancient technologies now forgotten. The language of the myths, control over heaven and earth, command over gods and men, evokes images of lost instruments or mechanisms, tools of governance, communication, even manipulation. Could this be a poetic memory of a technological device passed through myth and filtered by millennia? It's important to be cautious. These are not conclusions, but questions. Hypotheses carved from absence and silence. There is no recovered artifact that definitively matches the Tablet of Destinies, no object that scholars can point to and say, this is it. But that, too, is part of the mystery. In a region that has yielded thousands of tablets, contracts, receipts, hymns, poems, why does this one remain missing? Was it hidden, destroyed, never physical at all? Or, as some believe, was it simply too sacred to reproduce? The Mesopotamians were not careless with symbols. They believed that writing itself held power, that to inscribe something on clay was to give it life, permanence, and force. The very act of writing destinies would have been sacred, restricted. Perhaps the Tablet of Destinies was never replicated because it could not be. Its knowledge reserved for the highest priests, the most secret rites. Or perhaps it lies still, somewhere beneath the sands, overlooked, unread, unrecognized for what it truly is. And there is one more question, perhaps the most difficult of all. If we were to find it, would we understand it? Could we read its symbols? Could we decipher its purpose? Or would it speak in a language not of grammar, but of belief, encoded in ritual, myth, and perception so far removed from our own that its true meaning would remain sealed? Like so many mysteries of Mesopotamia, the Tablet of Destinies sits at the crossroads of fact and legend, memory and myth, an object of immense symbolic weight, and perhaps something more. What was the Tablet of Destinies? A metaphor for divine right? A lost artifact of unknown power? Or a whisper from a civilization that once reached higher than we imagine? At first glance, there is little to suggest the significance of this place. No towering ziggurat pierces the sky. No inscriptions announce a city's former glory. Yet this is Eridu, the oldest city in Mesopotamia. Perhaps the oldest city in the world. Here, where the ancient shoreline of the Persian Gulf once crept inland, Eridu emerged from the marshes like a vision. According to Sumerian tradition, it was the first city, the birthplace of kingship, and the home of Enki, the god of fresh water, wisdom, and creation. And yet, Eridu is gone. Its temples are in ruins. Its canals are dry. Its name, once whispered in reverent hymns, has faded from memory. How could the city that stood at the very foundation of civilization disappear? Archaeologists have excavated Eridu since the mid-20th century. What they found confirmed what ancient texts had long suggested. This was no minor settlement. Layer upon layer of habitation revealed a timeline stretching back to the Ubaid period, around 5400 BC. Over time, the city grew, its center marked by an evolving temple platform, built and rebuilt at least 17 times in the same sacred spot. This was the Abzu, Enki's sanctuary, a place of ritual, knowledge, and power. But something strange emerges when we look at Eridu's story closely. Unlike other great Mesopotamian cities, Uruk, Lagash, Eridu seems to rise early and then recede quietly. It does not evolve into a sprawling metropolis. It does not assert itself in the dynastic struggles of later Sumerian kings. Instead, by the early 2nd millennium BC, it fades from the historical stage. Why? Some scholars point to environmental factors. The shifting course of the Euphrates may have cut Eridu off from vital water routes. Siltation and salinization, the creeping poison of accumulated salt from centuries of irrigation, could have made agriculture unsustainable. Trade, power, and influence gradually moved elsewhere, toward cities better situated for survival. But others suggest there may be more to the story. The ancient Sumerians believed Eridu was not just the first city, it was the beginning of ordered existence itself. In the Sumerian king list, it is written, "After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu." This descent from the heavens is echoed in multiple myths. It is not a metaphor for civilization arising naturally. It is a statement of divine intervention. That kingship, the divine right to rule, the structure of society, was given to Eridu from the celestial realm. A cosmic appointment, a mandate. Was Eridu simply an early capital, or something more? In mythological texts, Eridu is portrayed as a liminal space, between earth and underworld, between gods and men. It is the site of the Abzu, the primeval freshwater abyss beneath the earth, from which all life emerged. Enki's temple was said to sit atop this source. This imagery aligns eerily with later concepts in other cultures, of sacred springs, hidden wells of wisdom, or subterranean chambers of divine knowledge. Could the physical location of Eridu have held more than strategic value? Could it have been chosen for spiritual or energetic significance? Ancient texts hint at rituals that took place here, rituals involving water, fertility, and the transmission of sacred law. Perhaps Eridu functioned as a kind of temple city, a holy place not designed for mass habitation, but for something else, something we no longer fully understand. Then there's the matter of its disappearance. Why did later generations, despite their reverence for Eridu in texts and myth, allow it to vanish into obscurity? Was it abandoned out of necessity or intention? Fringe theorists have proposed that Eridu may have held knowledge too sacred or too dangerous to preserve in the open. Some suggest that rituals performed here were connected to an earlier epoch, perhaps even a pre-flood civilization remembered only in fragmented myth. The repeated rebuilding of Enki's temple, layer upon layer, suggests a long tradition of maintaining something vital, even as the rest of the city faded. Others point to similarities between Eridu's mythology and other ancient origin stories, the idea of a sacred place, founded by divine beings, where knowledge was imparted to early humans. This pattern appears in Egyptian, Indian, and even Mesoamerican traditions. Could these parallels be coincidence, or remnants of a shared older truth? Even the physical geography of Eridu raises questions. The city once stood at the edge of a vast marshland, a region now largely desolate. In antiquity, it was a watery world, fertile, shifting, mysterious. Marshes have long been regarded as thresholds, liminal spaces where the earthly and spiritual realms blur. In Eridu's case, the symbolism is even stronger. The god of fresh water, ruling from the Abzu, guiding humanity from the fluid chaos of prehistory into the ordered structures of writing, law, and kingship. Was Eridu meant to last? Or was it always intended as a beginning, a seed planted to be buried and forgotten once its purpose was fulfilled? Today, standing among the low mounds and scattered pottery shards, it is hard to imagine that this was once the holiest city of an entire civilization. The ruins whisper of age, of secrets sunk in clay, and of a story that does not quite add up. Why did the first city, so revered in myth, fall so completely from the memory of history? Why was Eridu allowed to vanish, its temple abandoned, its name consigned to legend? What happened in Eridu that the ancients remembered in myth, but buried in silence? In the heart of ancient Sumer, carved into clay tablets thousands of years old, a name appears again and again. A name both feared and revered, cloaked in power, mystery, and origin myths that reach far beyond the physical world. They are called the Enuma, or more famously, the Anunnaki. In temple hymns and royal inscriptions, these figures emerge from the shadows of Mesopotamian mythology, beings of immense authority, descending from the heavens, wielding judgment, order, and knowledge. But who or what were they? Gods? Ancestors? Metaphors? Or something else entirely? To begin to understand them, we return to the city of Nippur. Here, where the winds still echo through ruins once sacred to Enlil, the high god of the Sumerian pantheon, the myths say the fates of humanity were decreed. According to the texts, the Anunnaki assembled in council here, seated beneath the towering ziggurat like a divine court. Their role was complex. They determined destinies, enforced divine law, and at times punished rebellion. Early inscriptions list them not as a single unified group, but as a shifting assembly of deities, often 7 in number, sometimes hundreds. Their ranks included gods of sky and earth, storm and water, justice and war. Some were benevolent, others far less so. But even as scholars translate their names and functions, the deeper question remains: where did the idea of the Anunnaki come from? The earliest references date back over 4,500 years, in the Sumerian city-states of the 3rd millennium BC. They appear in sacred texts like the Enuma Elish, the Atrahasis epic, and temple incantations. Sometimes they are described as those of royal seed, born from the union of heaven, An, and earth, Ki. Other times they seem to arrive from elsewhere, descendants of the sky god Anu, but not entirely bound by the laws of earth. It is this ambiguity that opens the door to mystery. Mainstream historians interpret the Anunnaki as divine personifications of natural forces and political order, symbols used by temple elites to justify power structures and rituals. In this view, the Anunnaki were tools of ideology, gods made to maintain stability, hierarchy, and cosmic balance. And yet, their stories go further. In certain texts, the Anunnaki are said to have created humanity. According to the Atrahasis epic, they grew weary of toiling to maintain the world, and so fashioned mankind from clay mixed with the blood of a sacrificed deity. Humans were created not as children of the gods, but as laborers. It's a creation myth far removed from the nurturing hands of more benevolent deities. It suggests intent, control, and design, echoes of a deeper, more unsettling narrative. Which leads us to the theories that lie beyond the boundaries of traditional scholarship. Fringe researchers, mythologists, and speculative historians have long fixated on the Anunnaki. Some propose that they were not gods in the mythological sense, but physical beings, visitors from beyond, who arrived in the distant past and were later remembered as deities. Ancient astronaut theorists suggest the possibility of advanced beings influencing early human development, technologically, genetically, spiritually. The arguments are often built upon patterns, repeated motifs of beings from the sky, the depiction of divine tools or gifts that resemble technology, and the detailed knowledge found in Mesopotamian astronomy, metallurgy, and city planning. Could it be, they ask, that the stories of the Anunnaki preserve distorted memories of real events, encounters beyond current explanation? Others point to iconography, the winged figures, the so-called handbag glyph found across Sumer, Elam, and even Mesoamerica. Coincidence, some say. Archetype, say others. But for those drawn to the unexplained, these repeated symbols hint at a shared legacy, or influence. More grounded interpretations see the Anunnaki not as literal beings or aliens, but as the echo of a priestly caste, real individuals, perhaps deified after death, whose knowledge and rule were mythologized over time. In this view, the Anunnaki could represent dynastic founders, astronomer priests, or even survivors of a lost pre-flood culture remembered only through layers of myth. And there is yet another possibility. Could the Anunnaki reflect a psychological truth? The projection of early human awe, faced with forces they could not explain, onto imagined higher powers? The storm, the flood, the changing of stars overhead. Personified, worshipped, feared. The gods as a mirror of the unknown. Still, the consistency of the Anunnaki across texts and centuries is striking. While cultures rose and fell, Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, Assyrian, the names remained. So did the rituals. So did the stories. Why? What was it about these beings that held such lasting weight? They were never just background deities. They were central to the organization of divine law, the shaping of destiny, the very structure of civilization. In some texts, they are even blamed for catastrophic events, plagues, floods, the collapse of cities, when the balance of power was disturbed. Were they imagined? Symbolic? Misunderstood ancestors? Or something much older, remembered across time in the only language that endures? Myth? So the question lingers. Who were the Anunnaki? And what memory, what truth, might still lie beneath the symbols and stories that have haunted our past for thousands of years? It begins with stone, baked clay pressed by a stylus, line after line of ancient thought. In the ruins of Nineveh, among the shattered remnants of the great library of Ashurbanipal, archaeologists uncovered one of the oldest known works of literature in human history, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Written in Akkadian, the language of empires, it tells the tale of a king, part god, part man, who sought immortality and wrestled with the great truths of existence. His journey took him through cities, deserts, and across mythic waters to realms beyond the grasp of ordinary men. But one part of his journey remains missing. Tablet 12. The 12th and final installment in the standard version of the epic is not like the others. It is different in tone, fragmentary. Its authenticity and placement are debated. And even more tantalizing, some researchers believe there may have once been another version or another tablet altogether that is now lost to time. The known tablets were uncovered in the 19th century, scattered across the ruins of the Neo-Assyrian capital, buried beneath layers of ash and history. When translated, they revealed a tale both intimate and cosmic: dreams, floods, gods, and the long shadows of death. Yet the narrative feels unfinished. In Tablet 11, Gilgamesh learns the secret of a plant that grants rejuvenation, only to lose it to a serpent. In many retellings, that moment signals his return to Uruk, humbled but enlightened. It's a poetic end, a fitting one. And then, curiously, comes Tablet 12, written in a different style, centered not on Gilgamesh's mortal journey, but on his grief over his companion Enkidu, already long dead by that point in the narrative. The tablet explores dreams, necromantic rituals, and a vision of the underworld. It seems disconnected from the arc of the previous 11. Was it a later addition, a misplaced relic, or part of a deeper, more esoteric version of the story now lost? Some scholars argue that Tablet 12 may not belong to the original epic at all. Instead, they propose it is a reworking of an older Sumerian story: Gilgamesh, Enkidu, and the Netherworld, inserted into the epic long after its first compilation. But this leads us to the real mystery. Was there ever a missing tablet, a lost ending? A version of the tale with a conclusion that was buried, stolen, or never meant to be known? This question deepens when one considers the existence of variant fragments found outside Nineveh, in sites such as Hattusa, Megiddo, and even further west. Some of these tablets are written in different dialects or scripts. They contain lines that don't appear in the standard version. Additional dreams, different endings, names that shift, scenes that hint at other layers. In one damaged fragment found in the ruins of Ugarit, Gilgamesh is said to have journeyed to a mountain that touches the sky, where he was tested by watchers and keepers of the stars. What part of the story is this? Why is it absent from the canonical tablets? And then there are rumors. For over a century, stories have circulated in the margins of archaeology of a tablet removed from Mesopotamia before the British Museum could catalog it, sold into private hands during the colonial-era excavations. Whispers of a 12th tablet that was seen, translated in part, then disappeared from the record. The supposed contents? A meeting between Gilgamesh and a being not of this world. A cryptic dialogue. A warning about cycles of destruction. There is, of course, no proof, but the tale of the Epic of Gilgamesh already straddles the line between myth and history. Gilgamesh himself may have been a real king, a ruler of Uruk around 2700 BC. His name appears in the Sumerian king list. His city has been excavated. His cult lasted for centuries. What began as memory became legend, and that legend, in turn, became one of the most profound literary works ever etched into clay. Still, the final tablet feels unresolved. Why would an epic so carefully composed, with such cosmic stakes, end so abruptly? Why would its final moments hinge on a dream? Why would the journey toward immortality end not in revelation, but silence? Some have suggested that the missing tablet, if it ever existed, was deliberately suppressed, that it contained knowledge deemed too dangerous or sacred, A tradition among esoteric schools speaks of a forbidden stone, a writing that revealed the secret of resurrection or the hidden identity of the gods. Could the Epic of Gilgamesh once have ended with such a truth? Or perhaps the mystery lies not in what is missing, but in what was never meant to be known. Even among the tablets we do have, entire sections are damaged, broken, or obscured by time. In some, entire lines are marked as unintelligible, as if the language itself refused to speak. What knowledge lies within those gaps? What meaning was lost to erosion, war, or human neglect? And if a final tablet remains undiscovered, hidden in the sand, buried in some forgotten archive, or lost to private hands, what might it tell us about one of the oldest human attempts to grapple with death, destiny, and the unknown? Somewhere in the silent halls of history, a missing voice waits. And we must ask, is the true ending of the Epic of Gilgamesh still waiting to be found? Or was it never meant to be written? In the heart of Mesopotamia, near where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers slowly wind their way through the desert, lie the ruins of a city that once sought the heavens. Babylon, a name that echoes across millennia, a symbol of grandeur, defiance, and mystery. Among its many legends, one stands above the rest, both in metaphor and scale: the Tower of Babel. It is said to have been a structure like no other, a tower so tall it sought to pierce the firmament, to bridge the gap between earth and the divine. A monument to human ambition, built not just with bricks, but with a singular language and unified will. And then, suddenly, confusion. The scattering of tongues, a project abandoned, a story passed down through religious texts and oral traditions. But did such a tower ever truly exist? Some scholars believe the biblical Tower of Babel may have been inspired by a real structure, etymology, meaning the foundation of heaven and earth. It stood in Babylon, likely begun during the reign of Hammurabi and completed, or expanded, under Nebuchadnezzar in the 6th century BC. Historical records suggest it was a massive ziggurat, possibly over 300 feet tall, with 7 terraced levels leading upward to a temple at its peak. But descriptions vary. The Greek historian Herodotus visited Babylon in the 5th century BC and described a tower of staggering proportions. Later, Alexander the Great, upon conquering the city, ordered it repaired, only for the effort to be abandoned after his death. The ziggurat eventually fell into disrepair, dismantled by centuries of conquest, neglect, and erosion. Today, little remains but an empty shell. Was this Itamananki the true Tower of Babel? If so, why does the biblical narrative, recorded much earlier, describe its destruction through divine intervention and the sudden creation of languages? Could this be a case of myth preserving a forgotten history? Or is there something more? Some archaeologists suggest the Babel story encodes a real event, the sudden collapse of early urban cooperation in Mesopotamia. Around 2300 BC, cities like Uruk, Akkad, and Eridu thrived. Then, mysteriously, the momentum slowed. Massive building projects halted, trade routes fractured. Could this confusion of tongues reflect the fragmentation of a once unified Mesopotamian culture? Yet the story carries deeper layers. It is not simply about architecture. It is about limits, boundaries between man and God. In the ancient Sumerian worldview, reaching too high could provoke divine retaliation. The myth may serve as a warning, but warnings often stem from something real. One Babylonian tablet, translated only partially, refers to a temple tower abandoned by the gods, and whose speech was made strange. The line echoes the biblical narrative, but predates it by centuries. Are we looking at a shared cultural memory, or is this just coincidence? And then there are the anomalies. Satellite imagery has revealed unusual geometric patterns beneath the soil near Babylon, structures misaligned with the known city grid, and foundations that suggest something once stood far larger than what remains. Could another, earlier tower have existed here? One that predates even Anunnaki? Some fringe theorists go further. They point to linguistic parallels across ancient cultures. Flood myths, sky-reaching towers, divine punishment for pride. They ask why such themes recur not only in Mesopotamia, but in ancient traditions from Palestine to India, and even as far as Mesoamerica. Could there have been a shared ancestral memory of a civilization that reached upward, perhaps quite literally, and was cast down? One controversial interpretation draws attention to the strange technological metaphors in some Babylonian myths. A few surviving Sumerian texts speak of the gods wielding tools that melt stone, or creating languages that only certain priests could understand. Are these poetic metaphors or encoded memories of advanced knowledge now lost? Some researchers in the early 20th century noted that the biblical account of Babel contains peculiar linguistic phrasing. The statement, "Let us go down and confuse their language," is structured oddly in the Hebrew text, almost as if translating a much older, non-Semitic source. Was this story carried down through multiple civilizations, slowly transformed as language itself evolved? And then there's the ultimate question. If the Tower of Babel was real, if such a structure once rose from the Mesopotamian plain to challenge the divine, what became of its knowledge, its builders? Is it possible that the scattering of languages was not just a metaphor for division, but for the loss of a unified science, a forgotten understanding of the universe? What if humanity once spoke not just one tongue, but shared a way of thinking, a cosmological blueprint that was fractured when the tower fell? Today the ruins are quiet, but in the silence, questions remain. What truly happened on these plains thousands of years ago? Was the Tower of Babel just a story of pride and punishment? Or was it something more, a symbol of an ancient ambition, a forgotten unity, a knowledge now lost to time? And somewhere beneath these shifting sands, does a buried foundation still hold the last stone of a tower that once dared to touch the sky? Amid the ruins of ancient Nineveh, near the modern-day city of Mosul in northern Iraq, lie the remains of a library, one unlike any other from its time. A library not of parchment or scrolls, but of clay tablets, thousands of them, baked in fire, preserved paradoxically by the very destruction that sought to erase them. This was the library of Ashurbanipal. Named after the last great king of Assyria, this ancient collection has fascinated archaeologists, linguists, and historians since its rediscovery in the mid-19th century. With over 30,000 clay tablets uncovered, many written in cuneiform script, the library contains hymns, medical prescriptions, omens, astronomical data, religious myths, court records, and correspondence. Among its contents is the oldest surviving copy of the Epic of Gilgamesh, a work that eerily parallels later stories in sacred texts of the region. But the library's survival and its final destruction remain steeped in mystery. Ashurbanipal ruled in the 7th century BC. Though often remembered as a fierce warrior and ruthless conqueror, he also saw himself as a scholar, king of the world, as his inscriptions boldly declare, and guardian of the scribal tradition. He boasted of reading difficult Sumerian texts that many of his own scholars could not understand. He sent emissaries across the empire to collect knowledge, texts from Babylon, Nippur, and far beyond. His aim was not merely governance, but preservation. Why? What knowledge did Ashurbanipal believe was worth gathering with such urgency? And what was it he feared might be lost? The tablets were stored in a dedicated wing of the palace, arranged by topic: medicine, incantations, rituals, science, law. Some even contain dual language glossaries. a Sumerian original followed by Akkadian translations. Others appear written in secret or extinct dialects. Were these educational tools, or remnants of something older? Then, suddenly, the silence. In 612 BC, Nineveh was sacked by a coalition of Babylonians, Medes, and Scythians. Fire engulfed the city. Palaces collapsed. And yet, the clay tablets, hardened by the flames, survived where other libraries, made of flammable materials, would have perished completely. But here lies the mystery. Many tablets were damaged, broken, or melted together. Some inscriptions seem to cut off mid-sentence, as if the scribes were interrupted, perhaps during the chaos of the siege. Entire sections of the library have never been found. Were they destroyed in the fire, or were some parts hidden before the attack? And then there are the gaps in content. Some scholars have noted the peculiar absence of certain categories, particularly texts related to advanced mathematics, architecture, or engineering. Others point out that while the library includes many omens and astrological readings, the more technical texts describing planetary systems or detailed astronomical models appear to be missing or never included. Were these gaps accidental, or were the most valuable tablets taken, either by invaders or by the Assyrians themselves? There are legends, whispers from oral traditions in the surrounding regions, of secret chambers beneath Nineveh. Stories of underground vaults that held the most dangerous knowledge. Some modern researchers have proposed that Ashurbanipal's library was only the public face of a deeper archive, reserved for the priesthood or royal elite. To this day, no such vault has been found, but curious clues remain. During excavations in the 19th and 20th centuries, archaeologists noted inconsistencies in the layout of the palace. Passages that led nowhere. Staircases that ended in blank walls. Sealed rooms filled with rubble, deliberately blocked. Could these have been diversions, or efforts to protect what lay beneath? Even more intriguing are the few tablets that speak cryptically of divine knowledge entrusted to kings and secrets of heaven and earth that were not meant for the uninitiated. One damaged text refers to a tablet of the Watchers, and another to a gate beneath the stars. The language is poetic, but could it imply a hidden library of celestial lore? Modern scholars often caution against reading too much into these metaphors, and yet some cannot help but wonder, what if the greatest secrets of Ashurbanipal's collection were never meant to be found? Today, thousands of these clay fragments are scattered across museums, from London to Baghdad to Berlin. Many remain untranslated. Some are catalogued only by number. Others sit in storage, waiting for scholars with the time, funding, and knowledge to decipher their ancient signs. And some may never be found at all. What did Ashurbanipal hope to preserve for the future? What knowledge did he fear would be erased from the world forever? And if part of that knowledge was lost in the flames of Nineveh, how much, if any, still lies hidden beneath the sand? Or perhaps the greater question is this: were we ever meant to rediscover what Ashurbanipal once sought so desperately to protect? It is a modest object, unassuming, roughly the size of a hand. At first glance, it appears to be no more than an ancient storage vessel, one of countless artifacts excavated from the ruins of Mesopotamia. And yet, this simple clay jar, unearthed near modern-day Baghdad in the 1930s, may hold one of the most puzzling secrets of the ancient world. Some have called it the world's first battery. Others believe it is something far stranger. The discovery was made by Wilhelm König, an Austrian archaeologist working for the National Museum of Iraq. What he found was not a lone artifact, but part of a small cache of similar vessels, each composed of a clay jar, a copper cylinder, and an iron rod. The iron showed signs of corrosion. The copper appeared isolated from the iron by a layer of asphalt or bitumen, acting, curiously, as an insulator. Koenig's hypothesis was bold. These objects, he suggested, were galvanic cells, primitive batteries. Could the people of ancient Mesopotamia, nearly 2,000 years before the invention of modern electricity, have mastered electrochemical technology? The question sounds outrageous at first, and yet, the components are chemically sound. In controlled experiments, replicas of the Baghdad Battery have been shown to produce small but measurable voltages, enough to create mild electric currents. When filled with vinegar, lemon juice, or grape juice, common substances in the region, these replicas can generate up to 1 volt per cell. But if these were batteries, what were they powering? No ancient lamps or tools connected to electrical systems have ever been recovered from Mesopotamian sites. No wires, no generators, no written texts detailing electrical use. The silence is deafening. Some researchers have speculated that these jars may have been used for electroplating, applying thin layers of precious metals onto surfaces, perhaps to create religious icons or ceremonial objects. Yet no electroplated artifacts, clearly linked to Mesopotamia or the Parthian period, have been confirmed. Others propose that the devices had symbolic or medicinal use. Perhaps they were part of rituals lost to time, intended not for function, but for meaning. Some ancient cultures associated static electricity and magnetism with the divine. Could a jar that sparked or tingled when touched have seemed like an object of power? Then again, is it possible we're misinterpreting the object altogether? Mainstream archaeologists caution against reading too much into its structure. Some suggest the battery interpretation is a modern projection, an example of present-day bias, seeing technology where none existed. According to this view, the objects may have simply been storage vessels, perhaps for scrolls or sacred texts, with metal rods inserted for ceremonial purposes. The corrosion and materials may be coincidental. And yet, for an object created over 2,000 years ago, likely during the Parthian occupation of Mesopotamia, it continues to resist easy categorization. Even stranger are theories that stretch beyond traditional archaeology. Some propose that this knowledge of electricity was not an isolated anomaly, but part of a broader, forgotten science, perhaps inherited from older civilizations, now buried beneath layers of myth. Were these batteries remnants of an ancient technological lineage, once known across Mesopotamia? Others reach even further into speculation. Could the knowledge behind these artifacts have come from elsewhere? From a lost civilization predating Mesopotamia, or even from influences beyond Earth? The Anunnaki theory, rooted in Sumerian myth, reappears in this context, suggesting that these gods brought not only rule and order, but also advanced tools and devices incomprehensible to the societies they left behind. Of course, such theories lack definitive proof. No blueprints, no instructions, no signs of mass production or standardized usage. Still, one cannot help but wonder, if this truly was a battery, where did the knowledge come from? And where did it go? Today, the original Baghdad Battery, like so many relics of Mesopotamia, sits quietly in storage, its purpose still debated. Political instability in the region has made further excavations difficult. Artifacts have been displaced, looted, or lost. And with each passing year, the chance to recover context from the site itself slips further into the sands of time. Was it a toy, a fraud, a misunderstood religious tool? Or was it the faint echo of an ancient understanding, something once known, then forgotten? What if electricity was not discovered in the 18th century, but rediscovered? And if the Baghdad Battery was only one piece of a larger puzzle, how many other fragments have we missed? How much ancient knowledge lies buried, not beneath the earth, but in plain sight, misclassified, mislabeled, and misunderstood? They sit in silence, thousands of miles from the land that once birthed them. The edges of the tablets are chipped, some lines missing, their Akkadian syllables frozen in baked clay. To the untrained eye, they resemble nothing more than fragments of an old poem. But to scholars, and increasingly to those seeking answers beyond conventional history, these tablets contain something more, a cosmic riddle, a creation story like no other. This is the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian epic of creation. And within its lines, buried beneath metaphor and myth, some believe we find secrets not just about gods and kings, but about ancient knowledge, celestial wars, and the very origins of human civilization. Discovered in the ruins of Nineveh, within the famed library of Ashurbanipal, the Enuma Elish is composed of 7 tablets, mirroring curiously the number of days in a week, and the 7 classical celestial bodies visible to the naked eye: the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. It begins not with humanity, but with chaos. Before earth and sky were separated, before time was measured, there existed only 2 primal beings: Apsu, the sweet water, and Tiamat, the salt water. From their union, the gods were born, yet as the younger gods grew unruly, Apsu sought to destroy them. He failed, and from this primordial conflict arose a new order, led by Marduk, the champion of Babylon, who slayed the dragon-like Tiamat and split her body in 2, forming the heavens and the earth. It is, on the surface, a myth of divine conquest, a justification for Babylonian supremacy, wrapped in cosmic allegory. But is there more to it? The Enuma Elish is older than the Book of Genesis, predating it by centuries. In fact, many scholars acknowledge clear parallels: the division of chaos into sky and earth, the sequencing of creation, even the notion of speaking the world into existence. But unlike the Genesis narrative, the Enuma Elish centers not on a single deity, but a divine assembly, a celestial court. And Marduk, unlike a benevolent creator, is a warrior god. His victory is not gentle, it is violent, decisive, and cosmic in scale. Could these be remnants of a real misunderstood event? Some researchers propose that the story may encode astronomical knowledge, symbolizing planetary collisions, the formation of Earth, or the appearance of comets in the ancient sky. The goddess Tiamat, described as a raging, serpent-like presence in the heavens, has been likened by some fringe theorists to a celestial body, possibly a planet or planetoid destroyed in the early solar system. Others point to Marduk as not merely a deity, but perhaps a coded reference to an object or force, something that altered the balance of the cosmos, reordered time, and gave rise to the conditions necessary for life on Earth. Speculative? Certainly. But these interpretations are not without strange coincidences. The 20th century Russian cosmologist Immanuel Velikovsky famously proposed that ancient texts, including the Enuma Elish, preserved eyewitness accounts of cataclysmic planetary events, memories passed down through myth. He suggested that Venus, in its early trajectory, wreaked havoc on the solar system before settling into its current orbit, an idea met with harsh skepticism by mainstream science. Still, one has to ask, why would multiple ancient cultures, Babylonian, Sumerian, Hebrew, Egyptian, echo such similar patterns of chaos and reordering, celestial violence and divine rule? What were they seeing? Some alternative theorists go even further. They suggest the Enuma Elish is not myth, but memory, a distorted record of events witnessed by beings who were either extraterrestrial in nature or who possessed a level of technological sophistication lost to time. In this reading, the gods are not divine in the supernatural sense, but beings of immense power, terraformers, interstellar migrants, or remnants of an antediluvian civilization. Marduk, then, becomes not a metaphor, but a figure of real influence, one who restructured the heavens and imposed a new order. Admittedly, there is no physical proof of this. The tablets themselves remain silent, save for their poetic lines. But is it so implausible that ancient peoples encoded their knowledge through allegory? That celestial events, witnessed by pre-scientific societies, were preserved through the only language available to them? Myth? Tablet 5 of the Enuma. Elish is among the most damaged. Entire sections of it are missing, including what many believe would have been the most detailed description of Marduk's creative act. The very part of the epic that might hold the key to understanding its true nature is lost. Accident? Or something else? Throughout Mesopotamian history, entire libraries were burned, clay tablets shattered, temples razed to the ground. We are left with fragments, echoes in clay, interpretations layered over ruins. And as with so many artifacts from this land between rivers, the deeper we look, the more elusive the truth becomes. What did the ancients really know of the cosmos? Were their myths merely imagination? Or memory, passed down in metaphor and mystery? Was the Enuma Elish a story told to glorify a god, or a record of something older than history? Something we've only begun to decode? Among the ruins of Susa, long silent beneath layers of time, fragments of a forgotten language lie buried. They are neither Sumerian nor Akkadian, not cuneiform, though pressed in clay. Their shapes are sharp, abstract, enigmatic. Triangles, circles, bars, and strokes, scattered in patterns that hint at meaning, yet yield none. This is Proto-Elamite, the oldest undeciphered writing system in the world. It first appeared around 3100 BC in what is now southwestern Iran, roughly the same time as the earliest Sumerian writing. Yet unlike the cuneiform tablets of Mesopotamia, whose meanings have been largely decoded, the Proto-Elamite script remains a mystery. Over a century since its discovery, no one, not linguists, historians, nor AI-driven decryption models, has managed to read it. Why? The tablets were first unearthed in the early 20th century, during excavations in Susa and Anshan. They number in the hundreds, perhaps thousands, and seem to document administrative details, grain inventories, livestock records, or labor assignments. But beyond a few recurring numerical signs, their full content remains locked away, inaccessible behind an undeciphered wall. Proto-Elamite is a writing system that defies translation not because it's too complex, but because it may stand utterly alone. Unlike other ancient scripts that evolved from or into better-known forms, Proto-Elamite has no known linguistic descendants. It emerged suddenly, flourished briefly for about 2 centuries, and then vanished. No Rosetta Stone, no bilingual inscriptions, no cipher to guide the way. What civilization leaves behind a writing system and then abandons it so completely? Some researchers believe the Proto-Elamite people were part of a parallel civilization to the Sumerians. While Sumer built cities in the south, Elam's heartland was in the Iranian plateau, surrounded by mountains and deserts. The two cultures interacted, traded, even warred, but their writing systems evolved separately. Mainstream scholarship suggests Proto-Elamite was an early attempt at record-keeping that never fully developed into a mature script. Its creators may have lacked standardized grammar, or may not have shared a unified spoken language. Perhaps that's why it faded into obscurity. But others aren't so sure. What if Proto-Elamite wasn't a failed experiment, but something else entirely? Some fringe theorists note uncanny resemblances between Proto-Elamite and other mysterious scripts found across the ancient world, such as the undeciphered Linear A from Crete, or the cryptic Rongorongo glyphs of Easter Island. Could there be a lost global tradition of early writing? One that existed before the rise of the Sumerians and Egyptians? A forgotten system of communication shared by far-flung ancient cultures? The mainstream answer is no, but the question lingers. Others have speculated that Proto-Elamite was intentionally encoded, designed to be read only by a select priestly or administrative elite. Its abstract nature and minimal context could suggest a closed system, used for ceremonial or esoteric purposes rather than mass communication. Could it have encoded spiritual knowledge, ritual practices, scientific data? We simply don't know. In recent years, technology has joined the search for answers. Artificial intelligence models have been trained to recognize symbol groupings, frequencies, and positional logic within Proto-Elamite tablets. Some progress has been made, especially with the numerical components, but full understanding remains elusive. The symbols lack the consistency of alphabetic or syllabic scripts. There is no consensus on their phonetic value, and without a clear linguistic baseline, even the most powerful algorithms are left circling in the dark. Could it be that we're looking at Proto-Elamite through the wrong lens? What if it wasn't just a writing system, but something more? Some researchers have proposed that the symbols might not encode language at all, but represent a form of proto-scientific or metaphysical notation. Perhaps a visual code used in conjunction with oral traditions, mathematics, or astronomical observations. If so, decipherment would require not only linguistic insight, but a reconstruction of the entire cultural framework in which the script operated. This raises yet another question. What knowledge might be locked inside these silent tablets? Unlike the Sumerians, whose myths and laws were meticulously documented, the Proto-Elamites left no readable literature, no legends, no names. Their voices, if they ever spoke through writing, are now echoes without sound. And yet, they touched clay. They etched symbols. They left behind something purposeful, something that resists translation, something that haunts the edges of understanding. Was Proto-Elamite merely an evolutionary dead end in the long history of writing? Or was it a survivor of an older tradition, one whose roots reach back to a time before known civilization? A time before Sumer, before Akkad, before Babylon? If so, what story were they trying to tell? And why can no one today read it? In the heart of southern Mesopotamia, modern-day Warka in Iraq, lies one of the world's oldest and most mysterious sacred sites, the Temple of Eanna. Today, it is little more than a scatter of eroded bricks and fractured walls. But 6,000 years ago, this was a place of divine power, a center of ritual, law, kingship, and something else. Something still debated, still elusive. The Temple of Eanna, named for the goddess Inanna, the Queen of Heaven, was no ordinary sanctuary. It was the centerpiece of Uruk, the first true city in human history, a metropolis that predated even the rise of the pyramids, a city whose myths speak of gods walking among men. And at its heart, Eanna stood not only as a temple, but as a portal between earth and sky, between the known and the unknown. What secrets did it once guard? According to ancient Sumerian records, the Temple of Eanna dates back to at least 3200 BC. Built, rebuilt, and expanded over centuries, it evolved from a modest shrine into a sprawling complex that spanned over 12,000 square meters. It contained courtyards, sanctuaries, storage rooms, administrative centers, and altars. It served both as a spiritual hub and a bureaucratic powerhouse. Yet for all its civic function, the Eanna precinct was not merely a place of paper and politics. It was a stage for the sacred. This was the home of Inanna, the goddess of love, war, fertility, and cosmic order. Worship of Eanna was unlike anything else in the ancient Near East. Rites performed here were not just ceremonial, they were immersive, theatrical, and mysterious. Priests and priestesses, some said to be genderless or androgynous, would channel divine energies through ecstatic rituals. Offerings were left not only to gain favor, but to preserve the very balance between heaven and earth. From this temple came some of the earliest written records. The Eanna archives contain administrative logs, hymns, and epic poetry. Most famously, it is here that the Epic of Gilgamesh found its earliest form, etched into clay, then buried and preserved beneath the dust of centuries. And yet, as scholars piece together the fragments of Eanna's past, questions continue to emerge. Why was this temple rebuilt so many times, sometimes in radically different layouts? Were the architectural changes a reflection of evolving religious ideas? Or did they follow some pattern, some cosmological logic we no longer recognize? Some sections of the site show alignments with celestial events. Others contain foundations so massive and precisely layered that their construction techniques seem to exceed what should have been possible for a Bronze Age society using basic tools. Mainstream archaeology sees the Eanna complex as the outcome of cultural innovation, surplus agriculture, and the rise of early urban administration. But even within that framework, anomalies persist. Among the most puzzling features is the so-called Stone Temple, an early phase of the complex that predates many of the later brick structures. Constructed with carefully placed limestone blocks, this structure stands out in a region where stone was scarce. Transporting and assembling it would have required enormous effort and coordination. Why invest such resources at this particular location? Was the site already sacred before Uruk rose around it? Some fringe researchers suggest the foundations of Eanna may trace back to a pre-Sumerian civilization, perhaps a forgotten people with access to more advanced knowledge. Others propose that Eanna was built upon even older ruins, perhaps the remnants of a much earlier sacred site lost to time. There are also the myths to consider. Inanna's legends are filled with references to gates, portals, and journeys beyond the veil of the physical world. Could the temple have functioned as more than a place of worship? Some researchers have proposed that Eanna was not just symbolic, but engineered to be a kind of ritual machine, a structure designed to induce altered states of consciousness through sound, geometry, or sensory isolation. Indeed, certain chambers may have been used to amplify chanting or drumming. Narrow corridors, confined chambers, and reflective surfaces suggest a careful orchestration of space and sound. Was the Temple of Eanna a place where the mind could cross boundaries? Was it built not only to house the divine, but to connect with it directly? As excavation continues, fewer answers emerge than questions. What remains of Eanna offers only glimpses: broken stones, fragmented tablets, scattered clues in ancient myths. No blueprints, no final story, no definitive origin. Just the sense that something once happened here, something extraordinary. Did the Temple of Eanna serve merely as a temple? Or was it a transmitter of knowledge, of energy, of contact? If so, contact with what? Perhaps, like the Proto-Elamite script, the true purpose of Eanna is not lost, but waiting for the right perspective, the right question, the right moment in time to see the pattern hidden in plain sight. Until then, Eanna remains what it has always been, a mystery rising from the soil of the first city, asking us to remember something we may have forgotten, something older than writing, older than kings, older than history itself. In the heart of ancient Sumer, far from the wealth and clamor of royal capitals like Ur or Babylon, there lay a city unlike any other. Nippur, silent, enduring, was not a seat of kings, but a sanctuary of the divine. The religious epicenter of Sumerian civilization, it was said to be the dwelling place of Enlil, the god of wind, fate, and supreme authority. And hidden within its ruined sanctuaries, its forgotten courtyards and buried chambers, archaeologists uncovered something strange, something unsettling. Thin slabs of clay, deliberately broken, buried in secluded corners, etched with symbols of power and vengeance. These are the curse tablets of Nippur. At first glance, they resemble many other tablets from Mesopotamia, routine records of trade, grain, or temple accounts. But a closer inspection reveals something darker. These texts are not administrative. They are emotional, personal, seething. Their language is charged with intent, to bind, to harm, to summon. The earliest of these curse tablets date back to the late 3rd millennium BC, though scholars believe the practice may be older still. They were not public inscriptions but hidden messages, buried in the earth, sealed within jars, or folded between bricks, meant not for human eyes, but for divine forces or unseen agents. What exactly do they say? They call upon gods and demons. They speak of broken oaths, of stolen property, of love betrayed or justice denied. Some invoke Enlil, others call upon Ereshkigal, the queen of the underworld. Still others appeal to unnamed spirits, described only as those who move beneath the dust. A tablet might begin with a simple grievance. He took the oxen and did not repay. But it quickly escalates. May his days be numbered. May his house be undone. May the dust cling to his bones. Another, more cryptic, ends with the phrase, bind his tongue in shadow, bury his name in salt. These were not simply prayers. They were tools, ritual weapons in unseen conflicts, and their presence in Nippur, a city devoted to divine order, raises unsettling questions. Why were so many of these tablets found near temples? Did the priests condone this practice? Were curses part of the official ritual life? Or were they subversive, private acts of desperation carried out by individuals under the weight of injustice, fear, or jealousy? Mainstream scholars often explain the curse tablets as a form of sympathetic magic, a belief that writing a person's name, then damaging the tablet, could symbolically harm the target. The logic of ancient belief systems is clear enough. Names held power, words had weight, gods listened. But then, why are some names missing? Why do some tablets contain only cryptic symbols, like a spiral beside an eye, or abstract shapes we still cannot interpret? And stranger still, why do some tablets refer to watchers in the dark, or silent ones beneath the gate, entities with no known equivalent in Sumerian myth? A few researchers, cautious but curious, have noted that certain inscriptions bear structural similarities to later Aramaic and Greek curse formulas found across the Mediterranean centuries later. Could there have been a continuous thread, an esoteric tradition preserved quietly through time? Others point to the physical handling of the tablets. Many were intentionally broken, snapped in two, or even shattered into pieces. Some were pierced with sharp objects before being buried. Could this have been part of a ritual to activate the curse? Or was something else going on? One particularly enigmatic tablet, discovered near the ruins of the Eker temple, bears no writing at all, only a faint, scorched outline. It was found inside a sealed clay jar, along with charred feathers and what appeared to be traces of human hair. No other examples like it have been found. No known texts explain its function. Some archaeologists dismiss it as a misfired ritual. Others aren't so sure. Could it be an artifact of a hidden cult? A remnant of a forgotten sect within the priesthood? Or a folk practice carried out by ordinary citizens outside the bounds of official religion? Still others, more speculative in approach, have suggested links between the Nippur curse tablets and the broader concept of intentional inscriptions, texts meant not just to document, but to affect reality itself. Could these tablets represent an ancient form of quantum logic? The earliest attempts to interface with something deeper, stranger, less easily defined? Could they be fragments of a lost system? Part writing, part ritual, part something else? What remains certain is this: the cursed tablets of Nippur are not just relics of belief. They are messages from a vanished world, a world in which words could wound, in which clay carried vengeance, in which silence did not mean safety. And though millennia have passed, the unearthed fragments still seem to hum with a quiet charge, as though the curses have not yet faded, only waited. What other voices lie buried beneath Nippur's dust? And if we listen too closely, might they begin to answer? In the dry expanse of the Kabur Plain, near the headwaters of the Euphrates, a lone mound rises gently above the horizon. It appears unremarkable at first glance, just another tell among hundreds scattered across the region. But buried beneath this sun-bleached soil lies one of the oldest and most perplexing sacred structures in human history, the Eye Temple of Tel Brak. Unlike the more familiar names of Ur, Babylon, or Nineveh, Tel Brak's story unfolds in shadow. Older than many of Mesopotamia's grand cities, its roots stretch back to the 5th millennium BC. And yet, it was not until the discovery of a peculiar building at its heart that scholars began to truly question what this place had once been. The Eye Temple takes its name from the thousands of strange, stylized alabaster figurines found within its collapsed walls, each one bearing a single, haunting feature: oversized, staring eyes. Who were these figures meant to represent? Gods? Spirits? Worshippers? And what purpose did the temple serve? At first, archaeologists assumed they were simple votive offerings, prayers made solid, left behind by devout individuals seeking favor from the divine. That interpretation fits neatly within what we know of Mesopotamian religious practice. Temples throughout the region were filled with similar statues, supplicants frozen in eternal petition. But Tel Brak's figurines are different. Massed together by the thousands, they weren't carefully arranged around altars or placed with reverence. Instead, many were discarded in pits, broken and crushed beneath later renovations. It's as if they had outlived their purpose, or were removed deliberately. And then there are the eyes. Not all of the figurines display the standard wide-eyed gaze common in early art. Some have multiple eyes. Others show figures holding smaller eye idols in their hands. In one particularly striking example, a female figure is flanked by 2 attendants, all bearing the same blank, staring expression, more symbolic than human. The repetition is hypnotic, unsettling. Why eyes? Why so many? In Sumerian texts, the eyes were the seat of divine observation, the vehicle through which the gods watched the world. To have the gaze of the gods was to be chosen, marked, or cursed. And yet, Tel Brak predates the earliest written Sumerian myths by centuries. Could this be an ancestral version of that same belief? Or are we looking at a much older, possibly separate religious tradition, one that predates even the Sumerians? The Eye Temple was built during the Uruk expansion, around 3800 to 3000 BC, a time when southern Mesopotamian culture spread rapidly northward, blending with local traditions. But scholars remain divided on whether the temple is a product of that influence, or a local religious complex with its own cosmology, later enveloped by the tide of Sumerian colonization. Within its walls were not just figurines, but odd architectural choices: recessed altars, false doors, miniature shrines embedded within larger rooms, elements more commonly found in Egypt or early Anatolia than Mesopotamia. Some of the materials, Obsidian, lapis lazuli, came from faraway regions, hinting at a network of trade or ritual importance not yet fully understood. But the biggest mystery remains the mass of eye idols. Why were they made in such quantity? And why were they discarded so deliberately? A few researchers suggest the figurines represent the dead, spiritual proxies for ancestors who were offered up to the gods in exchange for protection. Others posit they represent a pre-Sumerian deity of surveillance and justice, a forgotten goddess whose gaze could pierce through lies and illusion. One more speculative theory ties them to altered states of consciousness. In a 2011 academic paper, it was proposed that the abstract nature of the figurines, especially the disembodied eyes, could indicate ritual practices involving trance, vision, or psychoactive substances. Were the worshippers seeking visions? Were they trying to see or be seen? There are no surviving texts from Tel Brak to answer these questions. The temple predates writing in the region. We have only the objects, the architecture, and the silence. But the Eye Temple may offer something more subtle than clear answers. It hints at the existence of entire systems of belief that have vanished without a trace. Not just forgotten gods, but forgotten ways of seeing the world, forgotten ways of seeing ourselves. Was this temple the seat of a now-lost cult of vision? Did its figurines hold magical properties once understood, but now beyond our reach? Or are they simply echoes of human yearning, expressions of a desire to be known, to be watched over, to matter in a vast and uncertain cosmos? Even now, over 5,000 years later, the temple's watchful eyes remain. Not as answers, but as questions carved in stone. Who were they watching, and are they still? In the southernmost edge of ancient Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates begin to loosen their grip on the land, the ruined city of Eridu slumbers beneath layers of dust. It is quiet here, eerily so. There are no tall ziggurats to pierce the sky anymore, no temple fires flickering in the wind. But according to the Sumerians, this place was not merely old, it was the first, the very first city. And in the heart of this city stood a temple, modest by later standards, dedicated to a god unlike any other. His name was Enki, lord of the freshwater abyss, keeper of wisdom, guardian of the me, the cosmic decrees that shaped civilization itself. But what exactly were these me? And why did the ancient myths hint that some of this knowledge was not meant for humans at all? The me, sometimes translated as divine laws or attributes, were described as both abstract and physical. They governed everything from truth and kingship to craftsmanship, emotions, and sexuality. According to the Sumerians, Enki didn't just create these forces. He possessed them, guarded them, and, crucially, chose when and how to share them. In one famous myth, Eanna and Enki, the goddess of love and war, travels to Eridu to obtain the me from her uncle. After plying him with beer, Enki becomes intoxicated and hands over 100 of these sacred powers. But when he sobers, he panics and tries to retrieve them. He fails. Why would a god, so wise and deliberate, allow this sacred knowledge to escape, unless it wasn't meant to be shared? Some scholars interpret this myth as a metaphor for the transfer of power, from Eridu to Uruk, but others see something deeper, a warning. Because within the me were not just virtues and societal roles, but darker aspects: destruction, deceit, the manipulation of language, the burning of cities, war. Who decided humans were ready for these forces? Enki, in Sumerian myth, is a complex figure. He creates humanity from clay and blood, but not out of affection, out of necessity. The gods are tired of laboring to maintain the world and need servants. Later, during the Great Flood, when the assembly of gods agrees to destroy humanity, it is Enki who secretly warns a mortal, Ziusudra, to build a boat and survive. It is a recurring pattern, giving knowledge that perhaps was never meant to be given. Could it be that Enki's wisdom is more than myth? The concept of a divine trickster guarding and dispensing hidden knowledge echoes through many ancient traditions. From Prometheus stealing fire for mankind to the serpent in Eden whispering secrets of good and evil, there is a pattern. Knowledge given too soon, or knowledge taken. And at the heart of the Sumerian version is Enki, neither hero nor villain, but something else entirely. What if the me were not merely metaphors for aspects of culture? What if they represented actual technological, metaphysical, or energetic forces, a kind of sacred programming that the ancients believed could be activated, transferred, even weaponized? According to the Eridu Genesis, a text recovered from the site itself, the gods decided to end humanity because it had become too noisy, too chaotic. Could this noise have been a metaphor for imbalance? A misuse of the divine laws? Modern researchers have occasionally pointed out the unusual precision in some Sumerian knowledge. Advanced understanding of irrigation, star cycles, metallurgy, and even rudimentary computation using sexagesimal systems. How did these breakthroughs emerge so suddenly, in a span of a few centuries? And why do they align so closely with the myths of knowledge being gifted or stolen from divine sources? There are fringe theorists, of course, who suggest that Enki's me were more than ideas. They were literal tablets or devices, relics of an advanced, now lost civilization, or perhaps something not of this earth. These theories, while lacking academic support, persist because the myths themselves leave space for interpretation. They don't describe inspiration or insight. They describe transmission, gifts handed from God to mortal, objects carried across oceans or through dreams. In a curious twist, certain Gnostic traditions, emerging thousands of years later, echo this ancient motif. That divine knowledge, once pure, was deliberately scattered, hidden, or distorted. Some were not meant to wield it. Some were meant to guard it. And always, there was a price. Today, nothing remains of Enki's temple but fragments, bits of fired clay, disintegrated stone. But in the stories, the god is still there, still watching, still whispering. What was Enki guarding so carefully beneath Eridu's cracked earth? Was it simply myth? Or might some echo of that forbidden knowledge, still lie hidden beneath the ruins? In the north of modern-day Iraq, once the heartland of Assyria, lie the remains of a city that once rivaled Babylon in wealth and wonder. Nineveh. Its name echoes like an incantation from deep time. Beneath its buried libraries and crumbled palaces lie hundreds of thousands of cuneiform tablets, some still untranslated, others only partially understood. Among these baked clay records, cracked and weathered with age, scholars have discovered something extraordinary, something that has challenged our understanding of ancient cognition and quietly raised unsettling questions. Eclipse predictions. Not vague portents or poetic omens, but methodical calculations, sequences, patterns, timing. Written over 2,500 years ago, these cuneiform tablets, particularly those associated with the so-called Mulapan series and the Babylonian astronomical diaries, contain an astonishing level of astronomical sophistication. So much so that modern astronomers, mathematicians, and historians are still debating, how exactly did they do it? The Babylonians tracked the heavens meticulously. They recorded the movements of the moon and planets, the appearance of comets, even the color of the sky. But nowhere is their celestial precision more astonishing than in their ability to predict lunar and solar eclipses. events that even today require advanced models and orbital data. How did they do it? With no telescopes, no computers, and, according to mainstream history, no trigonometry as we know it? The answer, in part, lies in a system known as the Saros cycle, a cycle of approximately 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours, after which the Earth, Moon, and Sun return to roughly the same relative geometry, and a nearly identical eclipse occurs. The Babylonians didn't invent the term. We did, but they recognized and tracked this pattern long before the Greeks wrote about it. Their records show an almost obsessive attention to the lunar cycle. They divided the sky into sections, charted the paths of the moon and planets against the fixed stars, and used a base 60 numerical system, sexagesimal, that allowed for remarkably accurate fractional calculations. It's the same system that gives us 60 minutes in an hour and 360 degrees in a circle. But here's where the mystery deepens. Some of these tablets appear to record not just observed eclipses, but predicted ones, with startling accuracy. The so-called astronomical diaries from Babylon contain regular entries that span over 600 years. Within them are notes on lunar eclipses, dates, durations, appearances, and many of these match modern astronomical back calculations with uncanny precision. But they didn't just know when eclipses would happen, they assigned meaning to them. Omens, warnings, messages from the divine. To the Mesopotamians, celestial events weren't mere natural phenomena. They were signals from the gods, especially Sin, the moon god. Eclipses were moments of cosmic imbalance, often ominous. They could predict the fall of kings, outbreaks of disease, or foreign invasions. And yet, even within this spiritual framework, their technical data remains startlingly cold and accurate. How did they refine their predictions? Some researchers believe they used a method akin to what we now call linear interpolation, a way to estimate unknown values using known data points. Others argue they must have had access to records spanning centuries to identify such long-term cycles. But that only deepens the question, who preserved that knowledge? And for how long? There are alternative interpretations. Some suggest that the Babylonians inherited older systems of knowledge, fragments of an even earlier, possibly pre-Sumerian civilization. Others note striking parallels between Babylonian sky lore and that of the ancient Indians and Chinese, suggesting that advanced skywatching techniques may have traveled great distances long before history admits such contact. More fringe theories push further. Could these eclipse tablets hint at a forgotten science, one that encoded astronomical information in symbolic language, now mostly lost to us? Some believe the ancients were aware of celestial resonance, of gravitational patterns, even of the lunar nodes, the invisible points where eclipses occur. How could that be? And if so, what else might they have known? These questions grow heavier when we recall that much of Babylon's knowledge was buried or destroyed, lost in wars, floods, and time. What survives is only a fraction of what once existed. Are there tablets still underground, untouched for millennia, that reveal even more? Was their understanding purely observational, or was it guided by principles we have yet to rediscover? One fragment from Nineveh, part of the so-called Enuma, Anu, and Lil, includes the line, "If a lunar eclipse occurs on the 14th day, in the month of Abu, the king of Akkad will fall by the sword." It may sound like superstition, and yet, cross-referencing historical records suggests such predictions were often taken seriously. Rituals were performed, proxy kings installed to absorb the bad omen, and the original monarch would vanish from view. But was this merely belief, or did the tablets encode something more than warnings? We may never fully understand how the Babylonians achieved their precision. Was it luck and accumulated observation, or something more structured, more deliberate, and more advanced than we have assumed? Perhaps the answer lies in the tablets we've yet to translate, or the fragments we've yet to unearth. What else did they see in the sky that we have forgotten to look for? Long before Assyria rose, before Babylon flourished under its towering ziggurats, and before Sumer etched the first human syllables into wet clay, there was Subartu. To modern ears, the name rings faintly, like a whisper lost in time. It appears occasionally in Mesopotamian texts, shadow-like and undefined. The Sumerians spoke of it. The Akkadians feared it. Even the early Assyrians recorded encounters with it. But where was it? And what became of it? Subartu, or Shubartu, was once considered a powerful region to the north of Sumer. Cuneiform records refer to it as a land of mountaineers, of untamed tribes and shifting kings. To the scribes of southern Mesopotamia, it was both a trading partner and a source of tension, occasionally an ally, more often an adversary. Yet strangely, no definitive ruins have been unearthed that can be confidently identified as Subartu's capital or cultural heart. No monuments bear its name. No temples, no royal stelae, no inscriptions proclaiming King of Subartu. Just traces, partial mentions, vague borders, shadowed suggestions. Some scholars have proposed that Subartu was not a single kingdom, but a term used by the Mesopotamians to describe the lands of the north, those beyond the Tigris, beyond the structured city-states. It might have encompassed regions near the Upper Zab, the Kurdish highlands, or the plains near ancient Haran. Others argue that Subartu was indeed a centralized entity, perhaps a confederation of tribes that predated the more rigidly organized Mesopotamian states. There are theories linking it to early Hurrian populations, whose language and culture remain only partially understood. Could Subartu have been their forgotten cradle? And yet, if it were so significant, as many early texts imply, why has it vanished so completely? This line from the Akkadian king Sargon's annals offers one of the earliest mentions of Subartu. But the tone is telling. It's a conquest, a subjugation. In other records, Subartu is described as a recurring threat to the early empires of the south, even being mentioned in prophecies and military campaigns well into the first millennium BC. Still, these references grow thinner as the centuries pass. Eventually, Subartu disappears from written history altogether. It is not destroyed so much as dissolved. Did its people migrate and assimilate into other cultures? Were they wiped out by conflict or natural disaster? Or was Subartu a label for something that was never a state in the traditional sense, but something else entirely? There are places in the highlands of southeastern Turkey, just beyond the reach of the Mesopotamian heartland, where ancient structures exist without clear cultural attribution. Circular enclosures, stone alignments, and megalithic fragments that predate writing itself. While none have been conclusively tied to Subartu, their locations overlap with where Subartu is believed to have once stood. Could these enigmatic sites be the earliest echoes of that vanished kingdom? Some fringe researchers go further. They suggest that Subartu may have been one of the remnants of a pre-cataclysmic civilization, one that survived a great upheaval long before recorded history and retained fragments of advanced knowledge. They point to the sudden rise of Sumerian urban culture around 3000 BC and ask, did they inherit something from the north? Something forgotten? Others draw attention to linguistic traces. The word Subartu shares phonetic similarities with Subari, a term appearing in early Hittite and Hurrian contexts. In some ancient religious texts, the Sumerians are listed alongside other primordial peoples, often associated with the underworld or nether realms. Are these metaphorical references, or faint echoes of a real cultural layer buried deep in antiquity? And then there's the unsettling possibility that Subartu never vanished, but was rebranded, its people renamed, its traditions absorbed into later civilizations. Assyrian texts occasionally refer to Sumerians living within their domain, often as skilled metalworkers, artisans, or mercenaries. Could they have been a diaspora, surviving in fragments across the centuries? As the great Mesopotamian empires rose and fell, entire cultures were rewritten, names were changed, histories were replaced. Perhaps Subartu is not gone, but merely hidden behind layers of narrative, its real story obscured by those who conquered it. In the end, the kingdom of Subartu remains one of the most tantalizing enigmas of the ancient Near East. A place mentioned too many times to be entirely myth, and yet never enough to form a full picture. Was it a rival power that resisted Mesopotamian control? A cultural matrix from which northern traditions sprang? Or a label for something far older and far stranger than we've imagined? What stories lie buried in the mountains of the north, and why has time been so careful to erase them? As we leave the blurred northern borders of Subartu behind, where history and myth become almost indistinguishable, we return to the deep core of Mesopotamian belief, into a darker, more intimate mystery, one that hides not in lost cities or ruined palaces, but in the language of the gods and the nightmares of mortals. She appears without warning, a name whispered in incantations, a shadow flitting through the earliest stories. Lilith. Before she became a demon of medieval folklore, before her name was feared across the Levant and invoked in exorcisms and midnight prayers, Lilith belonged to the world of the Sumerians. But who or what was she? One of the earliest known depictions believed to represent Lilith comes from the so-called Burney relief, a terracotta plaque dated around 1800 BC. Here, a nude female figure stands with wings outstretched, clawed feet resting on two lions. Her hands curl around rods and rings, symbols of divine authority, and her head is framed by a horned crown. Her eyes are wide and knowing. Scholars have debated this image for decades. Is she Eanna, goddess of war and love? Is she Ereshkigal, queen of the underworld? Or could she be Lilitu, a feminine spirit referenced in earlier Sumerian and Akkadian texts? Lilitu, that's where the trail begins. In Sumerian incantations from as early as 2000 BC, we find warnings against certain night spirits: Lilu, Ardat Lili, Lilitu. These entities are usually feminine, often seductive, and consistently dangerous. They are described as spirits of the desert wind, as barren women, as child snatchers, as bringers of disease. But were these metaphors for something else? Perhaps psychological or environmental forces? Or did the Sumerians truly believe in a being that moved in the night, beyond the laws of gods and men? In one Akkadian protection spell, a man pleads with the gods to guard his household from the Lilitu who comes in the dark. The language is striking, vivid, anxious, and strangely personal. These weren't abstract entities. They were felt, feared. So who was Lilith to these people? Some researchers believe Lilith began not as a demon, but as a goddess, or at least a divine spirit of ambiguous morality. One theory suggests she was once associated with Eanna, serving as her handmaiden, or even as her darker counterpart. After all, Sumerian deities were not defined by human ideas of good and evil. They were forces, complex, contradictory, and often frightening. Could Lilith have once been a goddess of storms, of sex, of stillbirths? Or was she the personification of something much older, something inherited from even deeper roots? Some go further. They point to linguistic connections between Lilith and the Sumerian word lil, meaning wind or spirit. The implication is subtle, but compelling. What if Lilith is not a singular being, but a class of spirits, feminine forces that haunted the margins of civilization, the desert, the night, the womb? In time, Lilith would evolve. In Babylonian traditions, she becomes even more dangerous, one of many demons that required ritual protection. By the time her name crosses into later cultures, including ancient Palestine and Persia, she becomes something else entirely. The first wife of Adam, a rebel who refused submission, a seductress of men, a killer of children. But that's much later. What is fascinating and strange is that even in the earliest records, Lilith appears at the edge of structure. She is never given a clear genealogy, never tied to a specific temple or cult. She is mentioned in spells, not hymns, feared, not worshipped, and yet her presence is enduring. Could it be that Lilith represented something ancient peoples could never quite categorize? A manifestation of anxiety over childbirth, over female power, over nature's unpredictability? Or was she something far older than even the Sumerians understood? Some fringe theorists suggest that Lilith may represent a remnant of a pre-Sumerian belief system, perhaps one where women held ritual power now lost to time. Others wonder if she was a folkloric holdover from a more matriarchal or animistic society, one that was overwritten by the pantheon of male-dominated gods and cities. There's also the curious parallel found in other parts of the ancient world. Similar figures appear in early Arabian, Egyptian, and Hittite traditions, always feminine, always dangerous, always liminal, hovering at the edge of civilization, morality, and law. Why does this archetype persist? Was Lilith born from shared human fears across the ancient world, or was she passed down through something more concrete? Could oral traditions, even older than cuneiform, have preserved her story long before it was ever written? And then there is the silence. The official myths of Sumer and Akkad rarely mention her name. The great epics do not tell her story. No temple priestess ever served in her name. Yet her presence remains, persistent, unshakable, like a shadow that lingers even when the light shifts. Is this the mark of a suppressed memory, a forgotten goddess reduced to fear and whisper? Or is Lilith merely the echo of our own ancient uncertainty, our unease with the feminine unknown, with independence, with death and birth entwined? Perhaps she is all of these. Or perhaps something else entirely. What secrets did the Sumerians bury in their silence? And why did they fear to speak her name too clearly? As the final echoes of Lilith's shadowy legacy fade into the silence of ancient spells, we find ourselves drawn to the heart of Mesopotamia, not to its demons or spirits, but to those who claimed divine right over cities, rivers, and the very passage of time itself. The kings of Sumer. But not just kings. God kings. In 1906, archaeologists unearthed a peculiar artifact from the ruins of Nippur, a broken clay tablet unlike others found nearby. Its inscription didn't recount a hymn or a transaction or an administrative decree. Instead, it told a history, a list, of rulers and of years. Impossible to believe. This was the Sumerian king list, and it has puzzled historians ever since. It begins not with the rise of cities or the first agriculture, but with a claim that defies explanation. After the kingship descended from heaven, kingship was in Eridu. The phrase is repeated throughout the tablet, descended from heaven, as if leadership was not earned or seized, but given by forces beyond. Then comes the detail that truly unsettles the modern reader. The earliest kings, according to this list, ruled for tens of thousands of years. Alulim of Eridu, 28,800 years. Alalgar, 36,000 years. Enmen-Luana of Bad Tibira, 43,200 years. These are not symbolic reigns. The figures are exact, mathematical, and consistent across copies of the king list found at Kish, Larsa, and Ur. But how can this be? Is it merely mythology, an ancient attempt at grandeur? Or was it rooted in a belief far more profound, perhaps even a forgotten truth? Mainstream scholars offer one explanation, that these reign lengths are symbolic, not literal. Some suggest the use of a numerical system called the sexagesimal base, a 60-based structure used by the Sumerians, may have distorted interpretations. Others believe the long reigns served religious or political purposes, designed to elevate early kings into divine status and link their authority directly to the gods. But even these theories fall short of fully accounting for the precision and consistency of the record. And they do not explain why these kings were said to have reigned before the Great Flood. Yes, the Flood. Midway through the king list, there's a break in the narrative. Then the flood swept over. After this, the reign lengths become more human, more familiar, dozens of years instead of thousands. It's as if something divided two worlds, a mythic age and the one we now call history. What was this flood? Was it a local catastrophe elevated into legend or something global? And more strangely, why were these god kings said to rule before it? Eridu, the first city of the king list, lies near the edge of the ancient Persian Gulf. Today, it is little more than eroded mud brick foundations surrounded by desert. Yet 6,000 years ago, this was a sacred place, home to the temple of Enki, the god of water, wisdom, and deep knowledge. In the myths, Enki is the one who warns humanity of the flood, the one who keeps the divine laws, or me, hidden beneath the Abzu, the subterranean waters. The god kings who ruled in his name were not just administrators, they were gatekeepers of divine order. Could they have also been custodians of lost knowledge, carriers of traditions that predate writing? Some alternative theorists suggest these kings were not fully human, pointing to descriptions of them descending from the heavens, ruling with wisdom beyond their time, and living lifespans no ordinary man could endure. Fringe interpretations, drawing from Sumerian cosmology and the tales of the Anunnaki, propose that the god kings were in fact semi-divine, hybrid rulers born of gods and humans, placed to shape early civilization. A few even suggest extraterrestrial origins, reading heaven not as a metaphor, but as a literal origin point beyond Earth. But such claims are controversial, and no mainstream evidence supports them. Still, the question lingers. What is undeniable is the reverence these early kings commanded. They were not seen merely as rulers, they were priest kings, bridge builders between realms. They presided over rituals that sustained the land, interpreted the stars, and decided the fate of crops and empires alike. Take Gilgamesh of Uruk, perhaps the most famous of them. The Epic of Gilgamesh tells of a man two-thirds divine, whose strength defies comprehension, and whose quest leads him to the edge of death and wisdom. He too appears on the king list, his reign recorded as a tangible fact, not fiction. So where does myth end and reality begin? Could it be that the first chapters of civilization were shaped by figures whose origins are lost not just to time, but to categories of thought we no longer understand? Were they simply exaggerated heroes of memory, or were they witnesses to an age before the flood, when the lines between the divine and the mortal had not yet hardened? Even today, we have no definitive answer. The tablets do not explain. The stones do not speak. And so, we are left with a list of names, a list of years, and a question. Who were the god kings of Sumer, symbols of power or keepers of secrets that humanity is only now beginning to remember? As we leave the enigma of the god kings behind, those figures who, according to Sumerian tradition, descended from heaven to rule, our attention turns upward to the very sky from which they claimed their mandate. But this is no metaphor. The ancient people of Mesopotamia did more than revere the heavens. They studied them, mapped them, predicted their rhythms with a precision that still baffles astronomers today. This is the Mul-Apen, a name that translates to the plow star. It is one of several star charts found in the ruins of Assyrian and Babylonian libraries, and it contains more than mere stargazing lore. The tablet, likely copied around 700 BC but believed to be based on sources far older, lists fixed stars, rising and setting times, seasonal constellations, and celestial omens. But the mystery lies not in what the Mesopotamians saw, but in how they knew to look for it. How, thousands of years before modern telescopes, did ancient scribes chart the sky with such consistent accuracy? How did they differentiate planets from stars, understand the ecliptic, and recognize retrograde motion? And more importantly, why? The Mesopotamians divided the sky into three great celestial paths: the path of Enlil in the north, Anu in the center, and Ea in the south. This tripartite system was not arbitrary. It was mathematical, symmetrical, and connected to both agriculture and theology. Each path held constellations associated with deities and seasonal changes, forming a sacred calendar in the stars. Their star maps identified the motion of Venus with astonishing regularity, tracked in texts like the Ammisaduqa tablet, dating back to the 17th century BC. They observed the lunar cycle with enough detail to construct intercalated calendars, adding leap months to keep their system in harmony with both moon and sun. Mainstream historians suggest that these skills developed over generations of careful observation, that early priest astronomers, scribes trained in both divination and mathematics, meticulously recorded data until patterns emerged. And yet, the records we possess hint at something even deeper. Consider the planisphere, an ancient star chart dated to around 650 BC. Some believe it may contain a record of an asteroid impact or celestial event seen over Mesopotamia. Its inscriptions appear to describe constellations out of position, as if the sky had changed. Why would ancient observers mark the heavens with such urgency? And how did they encode this knowledge so precisely in clay, with only the naked eye? From the tops of ziggurats, those stepped temples that still rise from Mesopotamian soil like time-worn pyramids, priests known as Baru would scan the night sky. For them, astronomy was not science as we know it. It was divination, a language of the gods. They saw eclipses as omens, comets as messages, and planetary alignments as signs of war or prosperity. But encoded within this belief system was an astonishing discipline. The Enuma Anu Enlil, a massive compendium of over 7,000 celestial omens, reads like a hybrid of scientific journal and prophetic manuscript. And here, speculation begins to stir. Could the Mesopotamians have inherited astronomical knowledge from an even older civilization? Perhaps one that existed before the flood so often referenced in their texts? Some alternative theorists propose that the star maps were not fully their own invention. They point to similarities between Mesopotamian constellations and those found later in Egypt, the Indus Valley, and even the Americas. The idea of an ancient, possibly global knowledge system is controversial, yet it persists. Others note the appearance of unexpected details, knowledge of precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis, which alters the position of stars over millennia. scholars debate whether this concept was truly understood in Mesopotamia. Mainstream academics tend to say no, but fragments of evidence, hints of changing star positions in very old texts, suggest otherwise. And then there's the deeper question: were these maps merely scientific tools, or did they serve another purpose? Some believe the cities of Mesopotamia were designed with celestial alignment in mind, that temples and sacred roads were oriented to solstices, equinoxes, and the heliacal rising of certain stars. In this view, the land and sky were bound in a cosmic mirror, one reflecting the other. If true, then these star maps were more than observations. They were blueprints, calendars, perhaps keys. Could they have held knowledge of cycles far longer than a human lifetime? Could they encode warnings, instructions, or messages meant to last through ages? So much of this knowledge now lies buried, not just beneath the sands of Iraq and Syria, but in the untranslatable symbols of broken tablets scattered across the world's museums. We know the Mesopotamians watched the sky. We know they mapped it. We know they believed it governed the fates of kings and empires alike. But what we do not know is how they began. Did the first astronomers simply gaze upward in wonder? Or did they inherit a tradition, an ancient understanding that predates even the first cities? And if so, what else might they have seen? What stories, what secrets, what signs still wait to be uncovered in the silent stars? Beneath this cracked and sun-bleached earth once thrived the world's first known civilization. Cities with stone temples, wide canals, bustling marketplaces, and detailed bureaucracies, built thousands of years before the Great Pyramids, before the rise of Rome, before the names of Europe were even conceived. Sumer, a land of priest kings, law codes, and cuneiform tablets. A land where the first recorded stories, the Epic of Gilgamesh among them, were inscribed into clay. Here, in the cradle of what would become Iraq, the Sumerians laid the groundwork for nearly every major system of civilization. And yet, their story ends as abruptly as it begins. Around 2000 BC, the vibrant and complex cities of Sumer began to wither. The reasons, we are told, are many, and yet none feel entirely complete. Was it drought, invasion, soil salinization, economic collapse, or was something else at work? Something still beyond our understanding. Mainstream archaeology presents a plausible sequence of causes. Over-irrigation likely led to salinization of farmland. As salt accumulated in the soil, crop yields declined sharply, especially wheat, which was later replaced with more salt-tolerant barley. But food shortages alone do not explain the mass abandonment of city-states, the erosion of centralized power, or the near erasure of an entire language from the region. Sumerian culture didn't just evolve into something new, it disappeared. Historical records show the arrival of the Amorites from the west and the Elamites from the east. They conquered and absorbed what was left. Soon, the Sumerian language vanished from daily speech, surviving only in religious and scholarly contexts, like Latin centuries later. But curiously, the people didn't vanish. DNA studies suggest continuity in the population. It was the civilization, the organized structure, the systems, the memory of empire that collapsed. What could cause such a thorough undoing of a culture so advanced, so literate, and so deeply rooted? Ancient texts themselves speak of catastrophe. Laments from Sumerian priests describe the great wind that blew across the land. The destruction of temples and cities turned to dust. Was this poetic metaphor, or did they witness something more literal? Some researchers have pointed to evidence of abrupt climate change around this time, a regional aridification event sometimes linked to the mysterious 4.2 kiloyear event. For reasons still unclear, large parts of the Near East saw rainfall plummet and river flows decline. Civilizations from the Indus Valley to Egypt experienced parallel declines. Was Sumer's fall part of a global pattern? Still, climate alone does not erase cities. Societies adapt, migrate, reform. But Sumer dissolved. Some alternative theories suggest other, more speculative causes. Ancient texts, Sumerian and later Akkadian, speak frequently of divine wrath, of stars falling from the sky, of gods abandoning their temples, of a black wind that struck without warning, killing crops and cattle alike. Is it possible these stories preserve the cultural memory of a catastrophe we no longer understand? A volcanic eruption? A meteor strike? Or perhaps something we haven't yet uncovered? Consider too the notion, found in some interpretations of Mesopotamian mythology, that the gods once dwelled among humans, then departed. The Anunnaki, according to later legends, ascended or withdrew after fulfilling their purpose. Could these tales symbolically encode some event, political, environmental, or otherwise, that marked the collapse of Sumerian power? Still others look to the stars, not just as metaphors, but as possible keys. Sumerian astronomy was precise, and some theorists propose that their alignment with celestial cycles may have predicted or even anticipated great changes, perhaps even catastrophes. One fringe hypothesis suggests that a sudden astronomical event, a comet, a planetary shift, or a cosmic body on a near-Earth trajectory, could have triggered not just environmental effects, but social panic, religious upheaval, and ultimately collapse. There is no hard evidence for this. And yet, the texts remain cryptic, poetic, desperate. In the lament for the voice of a priest cries out, "The storm caught me up like a flood. My city, it is taken. My temple, it is shattered. The gods have departed." These words, written thousands of years ago, carry a weight that still haunts. What kind of storm were they describing? In the end, we are left with fragments, broken texts, silent cities, and a puzzle with missing pieces. Sumer rose in brilliance and vanished with astonishing speed. Their gods faded, their language died. Their knowledge, much of it, was lost. And yet, the mystery remains. Why did one of humanity's first great civilizations fall so completely? Was it merely the slow erosion of time and soil? Or did the Sumerians witness and record something far more profound than we yet understand? Somewhere beneath these plains, answers may still sleep, waiting for those who dare to ask the right questions. They are massive, unassuming, and made of nothing more than baked clay. And yet, few artifacts from ancient Mesopotamia have provoked as much curiosity, reverence, and scholarly debate as the Gudea Cylinders. Discovered in the ruins of Girsu, an ancient city once nestled in the lush lands of Sumer, now southern Iraq, the Gudea Cylinders are among the longest surviving cuneiform texts ever found. Created during the reign of Gudea, ruler of the city-state of Lagash around 2150 BC, these clay scrolls were not records of trade or law, but something far more unusual: a dream, a vision, and perhaps a technology that we no longer understand. The god Ningirsu appeared to me in a dream. He gave me the plan of a temple. He showed me a divine tablet, inscribed with the design. Here, in baked clay, is a story of a king receiving divine instruction, blueprints even, from a god. The temple he is tasked to build, the Eninu, is no ordinary structure. It is referred to as a mountain of storms, a place charged with celestial power and divine order. But what exactly was this temple, and why would the gods deliver architectural plans? Mainstream historians often interpret the narrative as ritual symbolism. The god Ningirsu, protector of Lagash, is offering divine legitimacy to Gudea's rule. The temple itself is both literal and metaphoric, a center of religion, power, and civic order. But there are other layers to this story, layers that even today remain difficult to categorize. According to the cylinder texts, the god not only gives Gudea a vision, but also provides tools for measurement, celestial instruments, and a tablet of lapis lazuli from which he is to read the temple's specifications. The language is strikingly precise, almost technical. Some scholars have drawn comparisons to architectural planning documents. Others point to the almost obsessive attention to measurement and proportion, a hallmark of Sumerian architecture that rivals the geometry found in ancient Egyptian or Indus structures. Still others ask more provocative questions. Could this text be more than mythology? Could it represent a real event, an actual transmission of information that Gudea experienced not as metaphor, but as tangible reality? Throughout Mesopotamian history, dreams were not mere fantasies. They were portals, conduits between the mortal world and the divine. And when the gods spoke, their words were to be obeyed, often with stunning precision. But in the Gudea Cylinders, this dream is uniquely detailed. Gudea is given a stylus, instructed to carve a stone tablet and to lay the foundations according to what he saw. Some have even suggested that the text describes a form of divine engineering. Fringe researchers have long speculated that Mesopotamian temples may have encoded not only religious meaning, but astronomical and perhaps even energetic functions. The Eninu, according to the text, housed devices known as emblems or standards, mysterious tools said to hum with the power of the storm god. Could these have been ritual artifacts, or something more functional, now lost to history? No such devices have ever been found, at least not clearly identified as such. Yet many temples from the Sumerian and later Babylonian periods were built with cavities, shafts, and chambers whose exact purposes remain unknown. In one passage, the text reads, "I made the sacred image of the god speak. I placed it in the temple where the wind would breathe upon it." What does it mean to make an image speak? Was this purely symbolic? Or does it allude to some practice or phenomenon no longer understood by modern eyes? One of the most intriguing elements of the Gudea Cylinders is their tone, not just reverent, but almost scientific in its devotion to detail. The temple is described with such technical rigor, foundation materials, dimensions, ceremonial protocols, that some have likened the text to a project manual. What kind of civilization writes dream visions like blueprints? Could the Sumerians have possessed a level of architectural and astronomical knowledge far beyond what we currently attribute to the 22nd century BC? Or is it possible, just possible, that they were remembering something given to them? Something not entirely of their own making? Today, the Gudea Cylinders sit silent, but their words still echo across time. They speak of gods who give plans, of visions that build cities, of structures born not from guesswork, but from revelation. And we're left to wonder, was Gudea's dream merely a mythic tale meant to inspire faith? Or was it something else? A true account of knowledge received, recorded in clay before it could be forgotten? Perhaps the real question is not whether Gudea dreamed, but who sent the dream, and why? In the heart of London, far from the dust and sun of ancient Assyria, a single monument looms in quiet defiance of time, the black obelisk of Shalmaneser III. Carved over 2,800 years ago, around 825 BC, this towering basalt pillar is not merely a relic of war and tribute. It is a puzzle, a time capsule from a world where kings claimed divine right, where tribute was taken in gold, silver, and submission, and where the lines between history and mythology often blurred beyond recognition. The obelisk recounts the conquests of Shalmaneser III, ruler of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Its inscription, written in Akkadian cuneiform, lists 31 years of military campaigns stretching across Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and the Levant. Each register depicts foreign rulers kneeling before the Assyrian king, offering tribute: elephants, camels, silver, ivory, and exotic animals. But it's one panel in particular that has stirred both scholarly interest and public fascination. The second register from the top. A kneeling figure, dressed in foreign robes, bows before the mighty Shalmaneser. The accompanying text reads, "Tribute of Jehu, son of Omri." This, we are told, is the only known image of a biblical king, Jehu of Palestine, depicted in Assyrian art. But is it? Jehu was a king described in the Hebrew Bible as a zealous reformer, a slayer of idolaters, a man who overthrew the house of Ahab with divine mandate. And yet here, he is portrayed not as a conqueror, but as a servant, a tributary. This image alone has fueled debates for decades. Some historians argue the depiction proves the historical veracity of the Bible, tying together archaeological record and scripture. But others point out a strange detail. Jehu is called the son of Omri. Yet, according to biblical chronology, Jehu overthrew Omri's dynasty. He was not his son by blood, nor his political heir. So why would the Assyrians record it this way? Was it a misunderstanding of local politics? Or did the Assyrians use son of Omri as a general term for rulers of that region, regardless of lineage? Or is this not Jehu at all? Alternative interpretations have emerged. Some scholars have suggested that the figure is not Jehu, but an earlier or even unknown ruler mistakenly identified. Others propose that the title Jehu may have referred to a faction or dynasty, not a person. Still others question the accuracy of the Assyrian records altogether. Was the depiction symbolic rather than literal? Then there are those who go further still. A small but vocal community of fringe researchers believes the black obelisk encodes information not only about political history, but hidden power structures, priest kings, hybrid bloodlines, or divine intermediaries who may have walked the earth in that distant age. They point to the strange precision of the art, the uniformity of the offerings, and the almost ritualistic format of the scenes. Why are so many of the tribute bearers shown in nearly identical postures? Why are the animals, especially the exotic ones, given such prominence? Could these panels depict more than diplomacy? Could they hint at trade in sacred animals, ritual objects, or even more arcane practices? And then there's the obelisk itself. Obelisks are rare in Mesopotamian architecture. Unlike their Egyptian counterparts, tall, pointed, sun-worshipping pillars, Assyrian obelisks are squat, broad, and covered in detailed records. This one is made of black limestone, heavy and difficult to shape. Why choose such a material? Was it simply durable or symbolic? Blackstone in Mesopotamian tradition often connoted the underworld, the cosmic boundary between the realm of the gods and the earth. Was this monument meant to serve as more than a historical ledger? Was it a declaration, a ward, a message to the heavens? Some independent researchers have proposed astrological correlations. 4 registers, 4 directions, 4 known planetary omens in Mesopotamian star lore. Was the black obelisk not just a document of conquest, but a map of cosmic dominion? Of course, such theories are speculative. The academic consensus remains grounded. The black obelisk is a political monument, built to broadcast Assyria's might, its ability to demand tribute from near and far. But even within that accepted framework, questions remain. Why are there no other monuments of this kind from the same period? Why has nothing else been found that depicts Jehu or any other biblical figure in such stark clarity? Why does this one artifact sit at the crossroad of two worlds, the textual memory of Palestine and the imperial memory of Assyria? And most curious of all, why was it buried? When archaeologists uncovered the obelisk in 1846 at Kalhu, modern Nimrud, it was found beneath the floor of a ruined temple, not displayed, not broken, buried. Was it hidden in reverence, or concealed deliberately, its message no longer safe for open eyes? The black obelisk continues to speak. In carved lines and silent stone, it challenges our understanding of kingship, prophecy, and power. Was it merely a monument to empire, or a cipher, awaiting the right eyes to see? And perhaps more importantly, what else lies beneath the ruins of Assyria, waiting to rewrite the stories we think we already know? In the south of modern-day Iraq, amid arid wind and silent ruins, towers a structure that seems less built than summoned from the earth itself. The Great Ziggurat of Ur, constructed around 2100 BC by King Ur-Nammu, it once stood as the central religious monument of the Sumerian city of Ur. Today, it remains one of the best preserved ziggurats in all of Mesopotamia, its angular profile casting a geometric silhouette against the sky, stark and imposing. But it is not the only one. From Eridu to Dur Kurigalzu, from Babylon to Nippur, these step pyramids once dotted the Mesopotamian landscape like stone beacons, rising not just above their cities, but into the very mythology of the people who built them. So what were they? What purpose did these massive, tiered towers serve in the oldest known civilization on Earth? Mainstream archaeology tells us that ziggurats were temple platforms, artificial mountains built to elevate the shrine of a city's patron deity. Each level symbolized a step closer to the divine. At the summit, in what was called the waiting room of the gods, priests may have offered sacrifices, conducted rituals, or received oracles, but no temple has survived atop any ziggurat. The summits are bare, foundations remain, but whatever sacred space once stood there has vanished, leaving only speculation in its wake. No inscriptions describe the ceremonies performed above. No images depict the gods' dwelling. The staircases seem too narrow for large processions, and yet too monumental to be merely symbolic. Could the ziggurats have been something more? Ziggurats were not built for habitation. There were no rooms inside, only solid core, made of sun-baked bricks, overlaid with fired bricks, sometimes glazed in colors associated with planets or elements. Blue for water or sky, red for Mars, white for the moon. Some researchers have noticed a curious pattern. The orientation of certain ziggurats aligns not only with cardinal directions, but with star systems or solstices. The ziggurat at Akkad near Baghdad, for example, is aligned with striking precision to celestial markers, leading some to suggest that these towers served as giant observatories or cosmic calendars. Could the ziggurats have been instruments of time? Did their architecture encode knowledge of the heavens? The Sumerians were keen astronomers. They tracked the movement of Venus, recorded eclipses, and developed the earliest known lunar calendars. Their myths speak of Anu, Enlil, and Enki, deities who ruled the heavens, air, and deep waters, often associated with stars and cosmic forces. Could the ziggurat have served as a bridge between worlds, not just metaphorically, but functionally? A platform for connecting the human with the divine, or the earthly with the extraterrestrial? Fringe theorists have long posited that these structures were more than ritual spaces. They suggest the ziggurats were landing platforms, communication beacons, or technological constructs far beyond their time. One theory, widely circulated but often dismissed, suggests that the word ziggurat itself, derived from the Akkadian zikuratu, meaning to rise up, is a reference not to height, but to something that elevates. A lifting platform, perhaps. A stairway to heaven, not just in poetry, but in literal terms. And yet, there is no evidence of machinery. No metals or magnetic stones embedded in their cores. No residue of advanced tools. Just mud brick, thousands of tons of it, layered with mathematical precision. But questions remain. Why were the Sumerians so obsessed with height, in a world where no natural mountains existed? Why did every city-state pour its resources into building these towers, when simpler temples would suffice? And what of the legends? In myth, the gods came down from the sky to dwell among men. Eridu, the first city, was said to be founded by the god Enki himself. The ziggurat, in this sense, was not just a place of worship, but a throne awaiting the return of divine presence. Could this architectural form, so distinctive, so enduring, have encoded a memory? A memory of something lost, of beings once present, once visible, and then gone. Even in the Tower of Babel story, recorded centuries later, echoes remain. A tower built to reach the heavens, a divine response that scatters humanity and confuses language. Was this tale an echo of something older? A misunderstanding or warning preserved across generations? Today, ziggurats lie in ruin, their faces eroded, their steps worn by time, their summits open to the sky. But their purpose remains elusive. Were they observatories, temples, towers of power, beacons, or something we've yet to imagine? And if we could rebuild one, fully, precisely aligned once more with stars and seasons, what might we discover at its peak? Would the gods return? Or were they never gods at all? Buried within the brittle clay of forgotten libraries, far from the grandeur of temples or the towering presence of ziggurats, lies a myth unlike any other. A story that seems to echo across cultures and civilizations. A tale of descent, sacrifice, and something darker. This is the story of Dumuzid. Also known as Tammuz, Dumuzid was the shepherd king of Sumer. But he was more than just a mortal ruler. In the earliest hymns and liturgical texts, he appears as a god, or perhaps something in between, linked to fertility, cycles of life and death, and the mystery of the underworld. His fate, sung in temple rituals and whispered across the millennia, remains one of the most enigmatic narratives in the ancient world. Dumuzid's descent to the underworld is recounted in fragments, preserved mostly in the lamentations and poetic hymns of the 2nd millennium BC. The texts are incomplete, riddled with breaks, but their emotional force remains intact. In the myth, Dumuzid is handed over to the netherworld as a substitute for his lover, Eanna, the Queen of Heaven, who had herself descended into the realm of the dead and returned. Eanna's journey is already extraordinary, a goddess descending through the 7 gates of the underworld, shedding an article of clothing or power at each threshold, finally arriving naked and humbled before her sister Ereshkigal, who rules below. But Dumuzid's tale is different. It is not one of voluntary sacrifice, but of betrayal. According to some versions, when Eanna returns from the underworld, she seeks someone to take her place. She finds Dumuzid adorned in royal robes, seated on a throne, not mourning her loss, but celebrating her absence. Enraged, she chooses him. What follows is a mythic manhunt, a desperate flight through the wilderness, and finally, Dumuzid's capture by demons who drag him down into the deep. But who, or what, was Dumuzid really? In the earliest Sumerian king lists, A figure named Dumuzid is described as a shepherd king who reigned in Bad Tibira before the flood. This Dumuzid, the shepherd, ruled for an impossible 36,000 years. Another Dumuzid, the fisherman, appears later, linked to the city of Kish. Were these names recycled over time, or were they meant to refer to a divine being manifesting in different forms? Were the myths allegorical tales of vegetation cycles, as many scholars suggest? Dumuzid representing spring's bloom and autumn's decline? Or do these fragments hint at a deeper cultural memory of a once-living figure deified after death, whose fate in the underworld masked a forgotten truth? The Mesopotamian underworld, Kur, was no place of fire or judgment. It was a vast, dusty realm where the dead ate clay and drank stale water. Unlike later religious visions of the afterlife, Kur was neither reward nor punishment. It simply was, and once entered, it could not be escaped, except perhaps by Eanna and by Dumuzid, briefly. In later Akkadian texts, Dumuzid's return is granted for half the year. His sister, Geshtinana, volunteers to take his place for the other half. It's an origin myth for the seasons. But is it only that? Why was this tale so important that it was reenacted yearly in sacred rituals? In Babylon, in Uruk, and across the Mesopotamian world, temples held sacred marriages, ceremonies in which kings played the role of Dumuzid and priestesses became Eanna. These were not mere symbols. They were believed to ensure the fertility of the land, the continuation of cosmic order. What knowledge, what ancient understanding was encoded in this ritual drama? The descent of Dumuzid has uncanny parallels in other cultures. In the Greek myth of Persephone, in the Egyptian tales of Osiris, in the Canaanite death of Baal. Even in Christian theology, echoes linger. The dying God, the descent into death, and the hoped-for return. Is this a shared human archetype, or the faint memory of a real event, told and retold until it took on divine dimensions? Some fringe theorists go further. They argue that the underworld in these stories might not refer to death at all, but to something else entirely. A hidden chamber, a lost domain, or even a subterranean realm with forgotten technology or otherworldly connections. They point to strange references in the text. The Kurgara and the Galater, creatures not quite human who drag Dumuzid downward. His crossing of a river not of water, but of tears and dust, and the cries of birds and animals who sense his vanishing before it happens, as though something is ruptured in the natural order. Are these poetic flourishes, or were the Sumerians describing something more literal, an event, a place, or a passage still unknown? One tablet fragment, now housed in the University of Pennsylvania Museum, ends with Dumuzid's voice echoing from the shadows. "My days are turned into darkness. I do not know the place to which they have taken me." It is a line that still resonates, uncertain, mournful, and unresolved. Was Dumuzid a god or a man? A symbol of agriculture, or something more ancient, more tragic? And if there truly was an underworld, whether of spirit, of earth, or of myth, could it still exist, waiting to be uncovered beneath the sands of Mesopotamia? What else lies buried beneath the silence, beneath the grandeur of Babylon, the towers, the temples, the monumental gates of kings, lies something far more subtle, and in many ways far more mysterious. A labyrinth not of palaces, but of passageways. Narrow, brick-lined channels carved into the very foundations of the ancient city. Forgotten arteries that once carried the lifeblood of urban life, water. Or something more? These are the drainage systems of Babylon, and while they may seem mundane, even technical, They represent one of the most enduring enigmas of ancient Mesopotamian engineering, because within these meticulously laid bricks and cryptic angles lies a question that archaeologists have yet to answer with confidence. How did they do this? And why? Babylon rose to its peak in the 6th century BC under the rule of Nebuchadnezzar II. It was a city of impossible ambition. Walls wide enough to host chariot races, the fabled hanging gardens, and sprawling temple complexes. But it was also a city built on swampland, where the Euphrates split the urban landscape, threatening both flood and stagnation. To counter this, the Babylonians devised something unexpected: a hidden system of underground channels, clay-piped gutters, and massive stone-lined drains that extended beneath homes, courtyards, and temples. It wasn't just functional, it was deliberate, strategic, almost surgical. We know from the texts that the Babylonians had a word for these systems, Apsu, borrowing from their mythology, referring to the deep primeval waters below the earth. That they used the same word for both engineering and the spiritual underworld is telling. Modern excavations in the late 19th and early 20th centuries uncovered much of Babylon's drainage infrastructure. The famed German archaeologist Robert Koldewey recorded brick-lined sewers running beneath the processional way and deep into the heart of the city. Some were over a meter wide and led from public latrines or temple wash areas, yet others, more puzzling, had no clear entry point at all. No surface inlet, no outlet, just sealed conduits buried deep in the earth. Were they abandoned designs, structural experiments, or something else? This has led to deeper speculation. Some researchers have pointed out that the drainage systems seem to align with temple precincts, especially around the Anunnaki, the ziggurat believed to have inspired the Tower of Babel. Could the channels have had a ritual use? Could water, or what it symbolized, have been as important as the structure itself? After all, in Babylonian cosmology, water wasn't just physical. It was sacred. It represented chaos, order, death, and purification, often all at once. The deeper you look, the more strange it becomes. Some sections of the system appear to be too advanced, engineered in a way that mimics modern principles of hydraulic pressure and flow resistance. Gentle slopes keep the current steady, preventing clogs. In some places, they incorporated sediment traps or diverter drains that suggest a grasp of fluid dynamics centuries ahead of the Roman aqueducts. And yet, no known Babylonian texts describe the engineering behind it. We have thousands of administrative records, temple hymns, and trade receipts, but almost nothing describing how the drainage system was designed, tested, or maintained. It seems to have simply appeared, already perfect. Where did this knowledge come from? Mainstream scholars propose that the system evolved gradually, perhaps built over generations, refined through trial and error, the result of centuries of collective urban memory. But others are less sure. Some fringe theorists suggest the knowledge was inherited, that it predates Babylon itself, carried from older Sumerian cities like Eridu or Ur, where similar but cruder channels can still be found. A few go further, proposing that the original design didn't come from Mesopotamia at all, but from a forgotten civilization that left no name, only its works. Still more provocative ideas speculate that these channels weren't merely drains, but conduits, not for water, but for energy, electrical, magnetic, or even spiritual. The Apsu, they argue, wasn't metaphor, it was literal. The Babylonians knew something about the Earth's energies that we have since lost. These theories, of course, remain outside the academic consensus, but the absence of explanation is striking. If the Babylonians engineered one of the most effective ancient drainage systems without recording the how or why, what else might they have known and left unspoken? In a time before pumps, before valves, Before complex mapping tools, they created an invisible infrastructure that kept one of the world's greatest cities clean, dry, and operational for centuries. And yet, why did it disappear? Why do later Mesopotamian cities lack the same sophistication? Why is there no record of these systems being rebuilt or emulated in the centuries after Babylon's fall? It's as if the knowledge itself was buried, along with the channels, lost to war, conquest, or deliberate silence. Could there be more to these tunnels than we understand? Could the ruins still conceal chambers, vaults, or flows that remain undiscovered? And what might still lie beneath the dust, waiting to be unearthed beneath the forgotten streets of Babylon? In the far south of ancient Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates converge before emptying into the Persian Gulf, lies a world unlike any other. The Mesopotamian marshes, vast, shimmering wetlands once described by Herodotus as a sea of reeds, a place where land and water intertwine so intricately that the boundary between them seems to vanish. It is here, among the still waters and whispering reeds, that a quieter mystery lingers, one that science has yet to fully explain. For beneath this timeless landscape, veiled by silt and centuries, lie the ruins of cities, cities without names, without roads, without stone walls, cities that once rose and fell upon floating islands of earth and reed, inhabited by a people whose roots stretch deep into forgotten antiquity, the Madan, the Marsh Arabs. The Marsh Arabs have lived in this region for thousands of years. Their homes, made from bundled reeds, curve into sweeping arches that mirror the horizon. Their boats, sleek, shallow, and silent, glide through channels carved by time, not tools. To the untrained eye, their lifestyle appears unchanged for millennia. But it's what lies beneath their feet, or rather, beneath the muddy waters, that raises the most profound questions. Archaeologists and remote sensing teams, using satellite imaging and sonar mapping, have detected the outlines of ancient settlements beneath the marshes. Submerged walls, streets, canals, entire urban grids. These are not traces of small hamlets or temporary camps. They are the footprints of organized, long-standing cities. But who built them? And when? Some of these submerged cities correspond with known ancient centers, such as Uruk or Larsa, whose influence extended far south, but others don't. Unmarked by any inscription, absent from cuneiform records, unclaimed by any known dynasty. These settlements, shrouded in layers of mud and mythology, don't fit neatly into Mesopotamia's otherwise detailed history. They suggest the presence of a culture that flourished, thrived, and then vanished, either absorbed into the great empires of the north or deliberately forgotten. Could these lost marsh cities be older than we think? Could they represent the remains of a pre-dynastic civilization, one that predated even Sumer, hidden away in the watery cradle of the Fertile Crescent? Mainstream scholarship remains cautious. The logistics of excavating waterlogged sites in politically fragile territory are daunting. Many of the most promising areas remain inaccessible or deliberately drained during periods of modern conflict. But still, the patterns persist. Regular formations, consistent spacing, large-scale planning, all beneath the waterline. And then there are the oral traditions. Among the Madan, there are whispers of ancient cities swallowed by the water, of golden domes now buried in mud, of stone walkways that once led nowhere but now appear only when the marshes recede during drought. These aren't just stories of natural loss. They are stories of exile, of intentional abandonment. In some tales, the inhabitants of these cities displeased the gods, and the land itself reclaimed them. In others, they fled something, or someone. Some researchers have pointed out strange architectural anomalies. Under certain parts of the marshland, the sonar scans reveal rectilinear buildings with dimensions more precise than one would expect of early Mesopotamian design. Rooms arranged in modular fashion, corners perfectly squared. This has led to speculation that the lost marsh cities may have employed a different architectural logic than their contemporaries in the north, perhaps even a different knowledge base. Could it be that these cities weren't abandoned due to environmental collapse or military conquest, but due to secrecy, isolation? A few speculative theories suggest these settlements were refuges, cloistered communities that withdrew from the emerging empires of Sumer and Akkad, perhaps religious dissenters, perhaps technological outliers, perhaps survivors of a more ancient catastrophe. Their location in the marshes, difficult to access, easy to defend, hard to map, would have made them ideal sanctuaries. One tantalizing hypothesis suggests that the marsh Arabs, or their ancestors, may have preserved elements of a forgotten pre-flood civilization. The Epic of Gilgamesh, the Enuma Elish, and other Mesopotamian myths all reference a great deluge, an event echoed in the Sumerian king list, which divides history into before the flood and after. Could the lost cities beneath the marshes be echoes of this older time? Not just ruined towns, but fragments of a world erased by water and time? As with so many Mesopotamian mysteries, we are left with more questions than answers. What happened to these cities? Were they slowly consumed by rising waters? Or did their builders retreat into secrecy, abandoning stone and brick for reed and silence? And what might still lie beneath the thick silt of centuries? Sealed chambers, lost texts, forgotten gods. The marshes remain, as enigmatic and beautiful as they were millennia ago. But perhaps they hold more than just bird song and memories. Perhaps beneath their placid surface, the past still breathes, waiting for the waters to part. In the eastern shadow of Mesopotamia, beyond the cultivated floodplains and the ziggurat-topped cities, rise the jagged slopes of the Zagros Mountains, harsh, ancient, and impenetrable. These hills, cloaked in legend and time, once birthed a people whose very name would come to haunt the tablets of scribes, the Gudeans. To the great city-states of Sumer, the Gudeans were a whisper of dread, a force not of bureaucracy or religion, but of raw disruption. They came not with diplomacy, but with silence, not with temples, but with conquest. And just as suddenly as they emerged from the highlands, they vanished, leaving behind only fragments of fear and confusion. Who were they? And why does their brief rule remain so difficult to explain? Our first glimpse of the Gudeans comes not through their own voices, but through the lamentations of their enemies. Sumerian tablets dating to around 2200 BC describe them as the fanged serpents of the mountain, a people who know no gods, who know no kingship. They are said to have brought famine, darkness, and disarray to a land once ordered by divine rule. The Gudeans appeared during a moment of chaos, after the collapse of the Akkadian Empire, one of the world's earliest imperial states. Under kings like Sargon and Naram-Sin, Akkad had stretched its influence across Mesopotamia, dominating both Sumerian and Semitic cities alike. But then, something broke. Drought? Rebellion? A mysterious curse of Akkad, as one poetic tablet puts it. Whatever the cause, the empire weakened. And into that power vacuum, from the misty Zagros, came the Gudeans. Herein lies the mystery. While their impact was clearly felt, the Sumerians mention decades of Gudean rule, disruptions in trade, even the abandonment of cities. The Gudeans themselves left behind almost nothing. No monuments, no archives, no inscriptions bearing their kings' names, save for a few entries on later king lists. How could a people powerful enough to bring low the might of Akkad leave so faint a trace? Some scholars suggest the Gudeans were not an organized invading army, but rather loosely connected tribes exploiting a moment of weakness. Their lack of centralized administration may explain their ephemeral dominance. Others argue that their rule was localized, never truly encompassing the great southern cities. That what Sumerians recorded as a time of Gudean rule may have been, in reality, a slow and scattered series of incursions. But some elements don't fit. The Sumerian king list, a curious blend of myth, history, and political narrative, includes a full dynasty of Gudean kings, not just one or two names, but over 20. Some reigned for mere days, others for years. Their presence in this prestigious list, which traces divine rulership back to antediluvian times, implies more than just regional rating. It suggests recognition, perhaps even integration. And yet, despite this apparent rule, we find no great temples built by the Gudeans, no elaborate burial sites, no laws etched into stone, like those of Hammurabi a few centuries later. It's as if they existed only through the memories of others, and even those memories are shaped by contempt. Is it possible the Gudeans deliberately erased themselves from the record? Or was their culture so different from that of the urban Mesopotamians that it simply didn't rely on stone, on clay, on permanence? A handful of artifacts, such as weapons and mountain pottery, hint at a material culture rooted in mobility. Unlike their southern neighbors, the Gudeans may have prized adaptability over permanence, clan loyalty over divine kingship. If so, then their short-lived control over the Sumerian heartland may have been as bewildering to them as it was to the scribes who recorded it. But the strangest part of the Gudean story is their exit. After some 80 years, if we trust the tablets, the Gudeans vanished. A Sumerian governor named Utu-Hengal is said to have led a revolt, defeating the last Gudean king, Tirigan, and driving the Highlanders back into obscurity. The texts celebrate this as a divine restoration. Civilization had returned, order was reimposed, the wild was tamed. But there is no battle site, no tomb for Tirigan, no definitive evidence of a climactic confrontation, just silence. And from that point forward, the Gudeans never return. They are not mentioned in later military campaigns. They do not evolve into a recognizable successor group. They simply fade. Some fringe researchers have proposed that the Gudeans were not local at all, that they may have come from farther east, or even from a forgotten highland civilization that existed outside the Mesopotamian worldview. One theory posits that the Gudeans were early Indo-Europeans, a speculative precursor to later migrations. Another suggests they were remnants of an even older population displaced by unknown events, cataclysmic, environmental, or political. And still others believe the Gudeans may have been the inheritors of a lost knowledge, something the scribes of Sumer found threatening. Their erasure may not have been accidental, but intentional. A cleansing of the record, a sealing of a door. Today, the story of the Gudeans remains a riddle. A fleeting dynasty that appeared from the mists, disrupted the known world, and disappeared just as quickly. They left behind no libraries, no gods, no legends of their own, only questions. What drove them down from the mountains? Who were they, truly? And what knowledge or power did they bring with them into the lowlands of Sumer? And perhaps most haunting of all, did they leave, or were they hidden? In the heart of Sumer, where the twin rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, braid through an arid land of reeds, clay, and starlit silence, a remarkable invention emerged. It was not a monument of stone or an idol of gold. It was language, preserved in hardened clay. Cuneiform. Angular, abstract, and elegant in its own peculiar geometry, cuneiform writing first emerged around 3200 BC in the city of Uruk. At first, it served simple purposes, accounting for grain, recording rations, keeping track of temple offerings. Yet from these humble marks blossomed a script that would endure for over 3 millennia. But what remains mysterious is not just cuneiform's origin, but its spread. How did a script born of Sumerian scribes come to shape the bureaucracies of empires far beyond the alluvial plains of Mesopotamia? What power lay within these clay tablets that led foreign kings, distant cities, and alien cultures to adopt this language of wedges and lines? The earliest tablets, found in the ruins of Uruk, Nippur, and Eridu, were tied closely to the Sumerian tongue, a linguistic isolate with no known relatives. It was a language deeply tied to place, myth, and ritual. Yet, within a few centuries, we find cuneiform being used by entirely different peoples: Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, and even farther afield, by the Hittites in Anatolia, the Elamites in the Zagros foothills, the Hurrians in Mitanni, and even the Egyptians, who, for a brief window of time, kept diplomatic records in cuneiform rather than their own hieroglyphic script. Take the Amarna letters, over 300 clay tablets discovered in the ancient city of Akhetaten in what is today central Palestine. Written not in Egyptian but in Akkadian cuneiform, these letters were exchanged between pharaohs and the kings of distant lands: Babylonia, Hatti, Assyria, and even small city-states in Canaan. Why? Why would Egyptian scribes, guardians of one of the world's most visually expressive writing systems, choose to use a Mesopotamian script and not their own for matters of international diplomacy? The mainstream explanation is pragmatic. Akkadian had become the lingua franca of the Near East, and cuneiform was the standard vehicle for its written form. Like Latin in medieval Europe, it served as the shared bureaucratic tongue of kings and merchants. It was practical, efficient, but there are scholars who wonder if there's more. Could cuneiform have carried with it not just language, but something deeper? A system of knowledge? A mode of thinking? Some archaeologists suggest that cuneiform was more than just script. It was a tool of statecraft and cosmic order. The Sumerians believed that to write something was to fix it in reality. A name inscribed in clay had weight, permanence, and spiritual consequence. Kings were legitimized by inscriptions. Omens were recorded and consulted. Laws were fixed and recited. Did foreign civilizations adopt cuneiform not just for its practical benefits, but because they recognized, consciously or not, its symbolic power? The Hittites, for example, spoke an Indo-European language, structurally and culturally very different from the Semitic Akkadian or the isolate Sumerian. And yet they chose to adopt cuneiform wholesale, not adapt it, adopt it. Could it be that cuneiform's abstract structure appealed to something universal? That its wedge marks, born of reed and clay, echoed in the consciousness of disparate peoples as a way to express the ineffable? And what of the anomalies? A few scattered tablets found in places like central Anatolia or the Persian Gulf remain undeciphered. Written in cuneiform, yes, but in languages no one can yet identify. Did these belong to vanished peoples who, like the Guteans, left behind no architectural legacy, only cryptic writings? Or were they part of a broader network, one we have only begun to uncover? Some fringe theorists go even further. They argue that cuneiform, one of the first known writing systems, was not invented independently in Sumer at all, but inherited. That its sudden emergence in Uruk, fully formed and complex, suggests not evolution, but transmission. Transmission from where? This is where the waters muddy. Some point to the still undeciphered Vinca symbols of Neolithic Europe. Others draw comparisons to symbols on the tablets of Tartaria or the lost city of Mohenjo-Daro. A few even whisper about knowledge handed down from pre-flood civilizations, a concept echoed in later Babylonian myths of antediluvian kings. We do not endorse these ideas, but neither can we fully dismiss the questions they raise. Cuneiform, unlike pictographs or alphabets, is not easily intuitive. It requires training, discipline, memorization. and yet it spread. Why? What compels a civilization to embrace such an arcane system, especially when it is not their own? Perhaps we will never fully understand the power these marks held in the minds of ancient people. Perhaps that is the nature of writing itself. It both reveals and conceals. It preserves, but selectively. And in the silence between the strokes of a stylus, in the hardened clay of a forgotten emissary's letter, we may still hear the whispers of something more, something older, something hidden,